There's no Anita, so we'll just have to skip that one. I think she got stuck in between the zones, probably. No. Somebody heard that she got stuck somewhere. So, somebody said she got stuck somewhere. Welcome to the Exponential Climate Action Summit 4. This is the fourth day we are broadcasting here from We Don't Have Time at COP26. And today we're going to talk about energy and transportation. My name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson and I am hosting this event together with my dear colleague Nick Nuttall. Please join me, Nick.
Yeah, hi, Katarina. What a deep and husky voice that was right now. Yeah, hi, great to be with you.
So Nick, you used to be, well, you were the Director of Communications at the COP in Paris. So please tell us about what's happening so far here at the COP in Glasgow.
Well, I think there's been some really good announcements by companies, for example, and the private sector of things they want to do. I was really pleased to hear about a $1 trillion plus dollar initiative today on the whole issue of long duration storage of the electricity generated from wind power and solar. And I think that's very important in moving forward.
And we're broadcasting here from the Nordic Pavilion every day. And today, as I said, we're going to talk about energy and transportation. Would you like to add something about, well, tell us something about today's theme?
Yeah, I mean, transportation, I mean, it's amazing that now we're seeing the electrification of vehicles. I mean, I think it took Elon Musk to really shake up the car industry, which for ages had been completely sort of, pushing this one to one side. So that's great, and we're seeing many new innovative schemes coming along. Polestar, of course, in Sweden, with their plan for a totally recyclable electronic car by 2030. So that's a good theme. And as for energy, well, we know renewable energy is doubling every 3.5 years. Which is exponential. This will achieve its part of the Paris Agreement, but we've got to be careful also about energy efficiency, which tends to get forgotten a little bit in this story. It has a big role to play in halving emissions by 2030.
And today I stepped into one of the plenary sessions we're in the diplomatic zone, and just to listen to the world leaders in there speaking about how they really get to grips with this is very inspiring. And there was one delegate from Chile that said that the small price on coal is really a big lie. So this is inspiring indeed.
And why is it so cheap?
Exactly.
They don't factor in the health impacts of coal. People don't factor in the pollution to water systems, turning them acid. People don't factor in, what happens in terms of air pollution from coal. If they had to price those things in, plus take away the subsidies, coal would be a dead dinosaur straight away.
Speaking of subsidies, we have this capture on state, and it's horrific. It's absolutely terrifying. So please tell us what is it about?
Well, the International Monetary Fund came up with this amazing report just recently showing exactly how the trillions that we're spending around the world on fossil fuel subsidies. And we thought it would be interesting to alert people to this by basically showing how much money has been spent since this COP opened. And it's eye-watering, isn't it? I said it last night. It remains eye-watering. 69, billion? Already spent since we've been at the COP?
It's incomprehensible. Thank you. I get so upset about this, so I can't even pronounce it right. So Nick, let's introduce a movie, a little video about this that UNDP has produced.
Yeah.
And the video is about a dinosaur.
Yeah, where's our dinosaur? We bought one from Hamleys.
We did have a dinosaur here on stage.
Listen up, people. You're headed for a climate disaster. And yet every year, governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? You've got a huge opportunity right now as you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
This is such a great campaign. And you can share it, amplify it, and the hashtag is Don't Choose Extinction.
Yeah, and it's in so many different languages, which is a great tribute to the power of the United Nations to get the message to all peoples around the world.
Absolutely. Speaking of different nations, we have hubs in Washington, DC, in Stockholm, and also in Nairobi. So let's check in with the hubs, shall we?
Yes.
And I'd like to start connecting with Nairobi. Let's give them a few seconds here to hook up. And we have with us in Nairobi, the hub is in Mount Kenya University outside of Nairobi. So let's see if we can get Dr. Robert Ngunge Josephine with us, who is moderating the hub in Kenya. And we've had some wonderful footage from Kenya, from the audience coming into us. There you are. So Robert, how are you today?
Thank you very much. Very
great. Well, thank you very much, Robert. Yes, you didn't hear my question. I just wanted to ask, how are you today and what's going on in your hub at Mount Kenya University?
Yes, we are doing very well.
And tell me about the setup. We had some lovely footage from your audience yesterday, including some children that was following the broadcast. Tell us, Robert.
So yeah, yesterday during our broadcast, we had a number of discussions and activities and interaction sessions with the audience, including one of our youngest climate activists that we hosted yesterday. And yes, it was really a great thing.
So thank you very much, Robert. We'll be coming back to you shortly in the broadcast.
Kwaheri.
Oh, that's right. You lived in Kenya.
Yeah.
So let's go now over to Washington, DC. And in Washington, we have with us our US representative, Shweta Chakraborty, who is a doctor in behavioral science. Let's see if we can get Shweta with us. There you are, Shweta. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, actually, US President of Washington, D.C., as you know, we've launched our headquarters in the United States. So we're thrilled to be representing. We don't have time here in the United States, out of Washington, D.C., and in Capitol Hill, you can see behind me. In fact, today we will have Congressman Kasten come into our studio, and we will be interviewing him regarding where we are with COP, where he sees COP going, and today could be a potentially monumental day here in the US in terms of President Joe Biden's Build Back Better agenda. There could be a vote as early as today to pass this $555 billion investment in climate through the United States Congress. And what that means for Americans is cleaner energy futures, $500 that is annually passed back to American families. This could really be huge. And if it happens while COP26 is going on, all the better to really showcase America's stance as a climate leader. So we're really looking forward to having Congressman Kasten in the studio. We'll share that with you all hopefully tomorrow, and we'll hopefully have really good news before the end of this week, and hopefully definitely by the end of COP in terms of where we are with passing this $555 billion climate investment here in the United States and here specifically in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Shweta. And let's now turn to Stockholm. We have a hub in Stockholm. See who is moderating our hub today in Stockholm. It's Christina Karl-Mark, who is one of the co-workers and the members of the staff in Stockholm. And Christina has a very extensive experience from working in the corporate world with sustainability for more than 20 years. So, Christina, what's going on in Stockholm in your hub, in our hub?
Yeah, hello Nick and Katarina. Yes, hello from Stockholm. We are here eager to listen to all the insights and reflections on energy and transportation that are so important in all of our lives, and that we get a transformation into something new. So we're looking very much forward to today's program here in Stockholm.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. And we'll get back to you shortly. And let's now watch a video before we go on to the first keynote speaker. See you soon, Christina. Let's see where we get the video, otherwise we go to introduce the first keynote speaker. Let's see if we can connect with the technicians here and see if we get the video rolling. All right.
I'll go. I'm on in the second half.
Yes. Nick will be off now for a while, and I'll take over. Let's see if we can get the video. And no video, I get signal here from the technicians. And let's move on to introduce the first keynote speaker of this day on energy and transportation. And the first keynote speaker, I'm very honored to introduce Maliti Fernando, who is a policy analyst and modeler at the OECD. And she works with the International Transport Forum at OECD. And Maliti advises national governments and also city authorities on climate impacts, accessibility, and also sustainable mobility. She recently managed the ITF's flagship report, the ITF Transport Outlook 2021, which presents global scenarios for the transport sector in the coming decades. So you have the floor, Maliti. I hope we can connect with you. Let's see. And while we wait, you know that you can always connect with the speakers and ask questions on the app. There you are, Maliti. You have the floor.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here to set the scene for this session on energy and transportation from the transportation perspective. If we hadn't realized it before, I think the pandemic, especially during the toughest of the lockdowns, really brought home the importance of the transport sector. in how our economy functions, how our store shelves stay stocked, in getting us to our workplaces, as an employer in itself, and as something that we rely on to feel connected to the people that we care about. Or perhaps on the flip side, maybe we enjoyed the empty streets and the ability to walk or bike or breathe clean air without contending with traffic. It's a sector that's so important to our daily functioning and well-being, but it's also one of the most energy intensive sectors. And it depends on fossil fuels for 92% of this energy. That's more than any other sector. When looking at the total emissions from burning fossil fuels, transport is responsible for nearly a quarter. And perhaps even more soberingly, the transport emissions are growing, with the exception of a temporary dip in 2020. At the International Transport Forum at the OECD, we try to understand how transport activity and the resulting greenhouse gas emissions will evolve in the coming decades, based on policies and actions that we take as governments, as industry, and as citizens and consumers. We find that demand for transport for both people and the movement of goods is expected to double, globally speaking, because of population growth and increasing economic prosperity, particularly in areas of the developing world where economies are expected to grow dramatically and where populations also happen to be growing rapidly. Now, if we continue our current practices and how we meet this demand, CO2 emissions, well, CO2 equivalent emissions, will continue to rise by 16% by 2050. This means that we will overshoot the level needed to have a chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by about 3 times. This will be largely driven by a rise in regional and intercity travel. This is what happens outside of cities, and road freight. But the story doesn't have to end there. In our most ambitious policy scenarios, we assume transformational but technically feasible policies are implemented, and the results show that the global transport sector could reduce CO2 emissions by 70% by 2050, putting us in reach of the Paris Agreement targets. This requires ambitious action plans, and it involves using the pandemic recovery period to really front load that work and invest economic stimulus that's uniquely available today in these high impact sectors. So how do we actually go there? What's clear is that there is no one key to success. Our analysis shows that we clearly need a toolbox approach. And in the transport world, we call this avoid, shift, improve approach. Now, I'm going to reframe that today by talking about prioritizing access to opportunities, shifting from car dependence to multimodality, and where we need technology improvements. So first, if we are to avoid excess travel and instead focus on access to opportunities, we'll be able to meet these goals. Let me ask you for a moment first, why does the transport sector exist? It exists to get us from one place to another because we are here and we need to get to our job or our school or our grandmother's house, and it's over there. Why does the freight sector exist? Similarly, we need products to live and they need to get to us somehow. But somewhere along the line, we started thinking that our economic progress was tied to, or in fact predicated on, traveling more and traveling faster. Aided by the invention of the private car, we started living farther away in sparser suburbs. We started widening roads, inducing more and more car traffic. And by doing so, we left a lot of people behind. Our cities and our transport systems are designed for cars, and women, children, older people, anyone with mobility restrictions disproportionately bear the costs of this. But our analysis shows that for freight and passenger transport, we can decouple transport activity from economic growth if our neighborhoods become places that we can work and send our kids to school and do our shopping. If we embrace digital technologies like we're doing today where possible to zoom into events. In freight, we could employ asset sharing, which means connecting spare capacity in some vehicles with demand so that different loads can be consolidated and we can ultimately use fewer vehicles. We still get to see the people we care about. We can access the opportunities we need and get the goods that we require but this can reduce more than a fifth of transport activity depending on the sector. In addition to this, we need to shift from our dependence on cars to embracing multimodality. Now, what we need is not to get rid of cars completely, but to shift from considering private cars as the default to using the most appropriate mode based on our personal needs and whatever trip we're happening to take. This means a combination of using public transport on high demand corridors with integrated shared mobility and car sharing options, and improving the ability to safely use micromobility or active modes like walking and cycling where those might be more appropriate, like shorter trips. Multimodality is a very important concept for freight as well. We need to improve interchanges between modes from shipping to rail or rail to truck, and improve the rail and inland waterway networks themselves to make sure we have a multitude of options. Now, while a lot of these improvements in sustainable alternatives are absolutely needed, our analysis also shows that these pull measures need push measures to discourage certain behaviors and encourage an actual shift. So this includes measures like carbon pricing or road pricing to reflect the true cost of fuels and infrastructures that we're using, but we haven't taken into account. This needs to be implemented fairly, of course, with localized assessments and an understanding of who is affected, how, and to what extent, to ensure that access to opportunities is not compromised and that goods aren't compromised either. Now, beyond reducing excess demand and shifting to multimodality, the reality is that we need clean technologies across all motorized modes if we are to meet the Paris Agreement targets. This includes private vehicles, buses, delivery vans, ships alike. Often the discussion around electrification centers around private electric vehicles. Electrification of all our private vehicles without the behavioral changes that I described would do nothing to solve the congestion, safety, space, and equity issues that car dependence presents. So they are a very important tool, but not one that should suggest that we can continue as is and hope that electrification solves everything. Further development is especially needed in our long distance and heavy duty vehicles, given the magnitude of the road freight sector and the flexibility that this mode provides. We know that it will remain a key method of goods delivery in the future, but it is responsible for 2/3 of freight CO2 emissions and is a growing share under our current trajectory. So cleaner fuels and vehicle technologies are imperative. Emissions from aviation could also grow by 2.5 times by 2050 if we don't act fast to adopt sustainable aviation fuels and improve aircraft technologies. Now, the solutions I've mentioned here, and the more that we've looked at in our transport outlook, they require coordinated action in all senses of that word. The solutions in one sector increasingly depend on other sectors. And as the title of this session also suggests, the success of decarbonizing transport does depend on decarbonizing energy. Especially as we shift to low or zero tailpipe emission vehicles, the emissions coming from electricity or alternative fuel production become much more relevant. And there's connections with telecommunications, manufacturing, waste management, land use planning, and so on to consider as well. Governments and industry also need to work together because they both play an indispensable role in setting the policy priorities and making sure those actions are taken. And lastly, it will take international collaboration to address emissions that are currently not covered under the Paris Agreement that occur in international waters, so the emissions from shipping, and in international airspace. The panel discussion today, I know, features elements of all of these points, so I'm really looking forward to hearing how the industry leaders are tackling this challenge in particular. Finally, I would like to say that for climate-focused transport policies to be cost-effective and gain public support, we've seen how contentious they can be, they need to align the goals of equity and the environment. Because ultimately, climate policies really are social policies. And if successful, sustainable transport will not only reduce emissions, but limit congestion, create more pleasant living environments, reduce social inequalities, create new jobs, and ultimately help us lead healthier lives. Thank you. Back to you, Katarina.
for connecting transportation with the social, well, connecting, but bringing up the social aspects of transportation. I'd like to ask you, what are your hopes for the outcome of the COP connected to transportation, or shall we say mobility?
Well, I have a lot of hopes for COP, but in short, I would say I think first off, the transport has made a lot of progress since COP21. We've seen some real change implemented, even recently coming out of COVID, and leading up to the COP, we've seen a number of really great commitments from industry, from cities, from countries. The ITF has been tracking the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, since COP21. And when we compare these revised NDCs that parties are submitting these days with the initial set, we are seeing some concrete improvements. For example, there's increase by 25% in the mentions of transport. There are transport measures included. 40% more parties are including these measures, which shows that there's an understanding of the importance of decarbonizing transport within the greater decarbonization goals. However, we know that for decarbonization to occur, we need quantifiable targets, and only 16% of parties have submitted NDCs that have targets for transport. We know if it's not going to be measured, it's not going to be improved, as the saying goes. So first off, I think I would like to say that we're counting on governments and representatives at COP to really translate goals into tangible, quantifiable targets for the transport sector to create a roadmap. And second, I would say that in order to actually act towards these targets, of course, we need to prioritize investments in sectors that help and not hinder progress. So I would love to see the money, to see evidence of the money being put where the priorities are. And so those I think are my hopes for COP.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Maliti. Thank you very much. And I have just one more question about innovation. Today there was a launch of a fairly, well, I would say promising initiative to create fuel for aviation from carbon dioxide by Vattenfall and other actors collaborating with Vattenfall. What is your what is your view on innovation connected to carbon pricing? We had a discussion about this yesterday in our broadcast, that if we just had carbon pricing, innovation would just be rocketing in terms of fossil fuel innovations.
That's a great question. Aligning pricing incentives is key. So whether that's helping innovation kind of prioritize those actions to move towards carbon-free or low-carbon mobility, or whether it's helping people choose their personal actions. I think, especially in driving innovation, we need to see that there's profitability in turning away from high carbon technologies and investing in low carbon technologies. So I would absolutely, we need to see our price incentives aligned with the goals that we have for climate policy. So whether it's carbon pricing, removing fossil fuel subsidies, all of those play a part.
And we have the counter here ticking away, so we really would love it for it to stop, right? Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Maliti, for sharing your insights and your expertise.
Thank you very much, Katarina.
Let's now move to the next keynote speaker. It's Jakob Tieter from IEA, and he leads the International Energy Agency's team of transport analysts in the Energy, Technology and Policy Division. And in this role, he aims to contribute to the global dialogue on policies, to promote the development and adaptation of technologies and operations that provide transport services that improve quality of life while minimizing pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions, and also other environmental and natural resources impacts. So before I turn over to you, Jakob, I'll just want to give a heads up to Nairobi for them to come back after this keynote with some questions to Maliti and also to Jakob. So stay tuned, Nairobi, and now over to you, Jakob Tieter.
Thanks a lot, and it's great to have the chance to follow this very comprehensive presentation given by Maliti and colleagues at the International Transport Forum. Indeed, the IEA and the ITF are both sister organizations under the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. I think hopefully I'll try to complement her presentation the very holistic and systemic overview that she's given of the transport system by delving a bit more into the energy system as a whole, and perhaps talking about some of the milestones that we've laid out at the IEA in our net zero emissions by 2050 roadmap report released back in May of this year, and with the explicit purpose of informing this COP, focusing on the transformations that would be needed, especially on the fuel side, on the vehicle side, but also again, systemic and operational improvements, efficiency improvements that would be needed across light and heavy duty vehicles, rail serving passenger and freight movements, as well as in maritime shipping and in aviation. And as we already heard, since around this time last year, in a recognition of the need to achieve something close to net zero emissions by 2050, to be able to have any hope of achieving an emissions pathway that gives us, limits global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, more and more governments and companies have announced ambitions to reach net zero emissions in the coming decade. And most often the flag point year, the target year is 2050. Of course, some countries aim to achieve this target earlier, some a bit later, but 2050 is increasingly becoming the target year of climate ambitions. That said, back in May, when we first released this report, net zero pledges covered around 70% of global GDP and CO2 emissions, but fewer than a quarter of these announced net zero pledges are actually fixed in domestic legislation, and very few are underpinned by specific policy measures to deliver them in full and on time. So there's this gap between what's been pledged and what has actually been backed up by policy. And it's that one of the aims of this IEA report is to inform policymakers at the national level, as well as investors, about what kind of milestones would need to be reached over the coming decade and then out to 2050 in order to bring net zero emissions across the entire energy sector into our reach. The report lays out over 400 such milestones across all sectors. And I welcome you to take a look at the IEA website. There's an interactive tool that allows you to explore the milestones across building, transport, energy, electricity generation, industry, fuels transformation. One key point is that this next decade to 2030 will be pivotal, both in terms of putting in place policies that can accelerate the deployment of market-ready technologies, things like electric vehicles, not just electric cars, but two-wheelers and buses, and increasingly, we're starting to see market viability for electric trucks. But also, we need to foster innovation in pre-commercial technologies that may just be at the prototype level or demonstration level. And we really need to invest in those technologies much more than what's currently being invested. So far to date, about $25 billion have been budgeted, but we estimate that $90 billion of investments in demonstration projects would be needed globally in order to put us on track such that by 2030, some of these technologies that aren't yet market ready could start to enter the market. Some of the high-level milestones that we've laid out for transport: already by 2030, about 60% of sales of light-duty vehicles, cars, will need to be zero emission, and primarily electric vehicles. And this has the benefit of, from an energy systems perspective, the main lever for achieving a net zero scenario, for achieving decarbonization, is decarbonizing electricity generation. Electric vehicles not only have no tailpipe emissions in contrast to internal combustion engine vehicles, but they also are much more efficient. More broadly across all end-use devices, electrification is one of the key levers. By 2035, nearly all light-duty vehicles, nearly all cars, essentially all cars, will need to be zero-emission vehicles, and 50% of heavy-duty trucks will need to be electric. Then by 2040, we talked a bit about sustainable aviation fuels that can be derived either from biogenic carbon or via electrolysis, capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, from waste industrial streams, or again from biogenic sources, and coupling that with hydrogen produced by electrolysis. Electrofuels, 50% of fuels in aviation would need to be produced not from fossil fuels, but by these alternative routes by 2040. Currently, this number is still well less than 1%. As was outlined in this keynote presentation from our colleagues at ITF, activity demand growth, a doubling of transport activity, is what we might expect in a business as usual scenario, but by harnessing some of these avoid shift strategies, by things like vehicle and fuel taxation, subsidizing public transit and walking and cycling infrastructure, incentivizing people to change their trips if they must travel by car or to take alternative modes, and really giving people a diversity of modal options. These are the kind of things that can reduce that business as usual expected growth. Much of the growth in transport activities is expected to come from developing and emerging economies as their economies rise and as populations grow to a lesser extent. The solutions are quite different across transport modes. The main solution for road modes is indeed electrification, either direct electrification or possibly, especially in longer heavy-duty vehicle journeys, things like inner-city buses or long-haul freight, perhaps switching to fuel cell electric vehicles. In sectors that are the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, shipping and aviation, possibly also heavy trucks, long-haul trucks, many of the technologies that will be needed are still just at prototype or demonstration phase. They haven't yet been taken up by the market. They're not mature. Things like open rotors or blended wing-body aircraft, or indeed lots of these pathways for producing sustainable aviation fuel. So it's no surprise that decarbonizing transport will necessitate a shift away from fossil fuels to alternative low-carbon fuels and to powertrains that rely on motors and fuel cells and energy carriers like electricity and hydrogen. But we shouldn't fool ourselves about how difficult it will be to shift the transport sector away from fossil fuels and primarily oil. Back when the IEA started as an organization, shortly after the first oil crisis in the 1970s, transport and final energy use sort of relied for oil for about 94% of final energy. Today, that figure is only around 92%, so we've come a mere 2 percentage points down from 1973. To diversify also the fuels or the energy carriers that are providing energy to the transport fuel mix will be a massive undertaking, requires a lot of investment, and of course it requires removing fossil fuel subsidies and taxing the use of fossil fuels in a way that also takes into account their societal and environmental impacts. I'd invite you all again to take a look at this net zero by 2050 roadmap scenario. It's online, it's freely available on the IEA website. We lay out there a feasible trajectory that aims to ensure energy security, affordability, universal energy access, economic growth. But doing so will require a change in the trajectory of the energy system and within energy transport, implying the need for massive investments, technology deployment, and right up front, immediately, policies to catalyze those changes. We can exploit efficiency opportunities aggressively today. We must focus on shifting to low carbon fuels and energy carriers, and we must start putting in place the infrastructure that will be needed to enable those low carbon fuel options. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I welcome any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jakob. And let's turn now to Stockholm first Washington first, and then to Nairobi. So let's go to Stockholm, Washington, and then we'll see what questions we have there from Shweta Chakraborty and her team. And after Washington, we turn to Nairobi. Let's see if we can connect with Washington.
Thank you very much, Katarina.
Terrific.
And so, fantastic keynote, lots of information there. All eyes are on transportation, mainly because of the hard-to-abate sectors within the overarching sector of transportation, like maritime, like aviation. And if we can figure that out, there's implications for other harder-to-abate sectors like cement and steel. So there's a lot of cross-learnings to come out of this. So when we think about innovations in maritime and aviation, you've talked about SAFs. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what is in the pipeline that may not have commercial viability as of yet, but potentially could really overhaul some of these harder to abate portions of the transportation sector. So clean hydrogen, for example, is something that we will be having a panel on in the coming days. Really curious to hear your thoughts on what you're excited about in terms of the future of overhauling aviation, maritime, those really harder to abate aspects of transportation.
Thank you very much, Jutta. Jakob?
For a deep dive into the hard-to-abate transport sectors, by which I would mean trucking, maritime, and aviation, I would point you to the Energy Technology Perspectives 2020 report, where we focus on those harder to abate sectors. In maritime, there are a lot of efficiency technologies in ships, things like wind assistance, enhanced wind assistance, that could be exploited, that are very close to market ready, if not market ready already. They need to be incentivized by fiscal and regulatory policies. There's also things just like slow steaming. By going slower, ships can actually improve their fuel economy, their fuel efficiency quite a bit. But then looking at the lower TRL level solutions, what we see as a destination fuel for most long distance maritime journeys, transoceanic journeys, is ammonia. Ammonia would need to be produced, again, through low carbon hydrogen production pathways. One advantage of ammonia is it doesn't have any carbon in it. So when you're either combusting it or eventually using it in fuel cells, you're not releasing any direct carbon. And so if you're making ammonia via low carbon pathways, things like using things like electrolytic hydrogen, then you can effectively cut out the carbon emissions of powering ships. In aviation, there are a number of exciting technologies that might be promising. For very short haul flights, it may be possible, if we can innovate sufficiently on the battery side, to get up to much higher energy densities. And this would require a step change in battery energy densities. Something like lithium sulfur or lithium air batteries might enable short haul flights to be completely electrified by battery electric aircraft. In the nearer term, hybrid electric aircraft using technologies like boundary layer ingestion might be an option for even mid-distance flights. Blended wing body aircraft, hydrogen jet engine aircraft, as are being worked on by Airbus. These are options that might play a more niche role, but sustainable aviation fuels will really need to piggyback on continuing improvements in aircraft efficiency. And we need to start to rely more and more not on fossil-derived jet kerosene, but on biofuel-derived jet kerosene or on electrofuels.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Jutta from Washington. Let's now turn to Stockholm and see if we have one question from Stockholm to the two previous keynote speakers.
Yes, Stockholm here.
Yes, Christina.
I have a question. I heard Maliti tell us that there is asset sharing in goods transportation, so that you actually use the goods transportation in a smart way. Do we see that as well in private cars? So it's not just sharing a car, but also sharing the rides and getting, because if a car is not full, it's actually waste. Do we have any good examples and projections there?
Thank you, Christina Kolmark from Stockholm. Maliti?
Yes, excellent question, Christina. So in the passenger sector, we would call that shared mobility, and that is a huge, that shows huge promise to help us move away from this private car model to something that involves shared, not only cars, but even something in between public transport and private vehicles. So little taxi buses with kind of higher loads of people than a private car, but maybe not quite as much as a bus. And so that is a key component of the different policy scenarios that we've modeled to see what might help us reach the Paris Agreement goals. And I would say that this is not simply ride hailing, where it's essentially a taxi service. We do want to see the spare capacity of these vehicles being used up, as opposed to simply moving from private vehicles to something like ride hailing. And I will say, in addition to just using up the space, it means that we can reduce the number of vehicles on the road, which means we can reduce the amount of city space that we devote to private cars, whether that's parking or the actual road space, and reallocate that to something that it has greater social value for all people, not just the private car owners.
Thank you very much, Maliti. This is actually up and running, for instance, in Hamburg. I used this service just a few months ago. So let's now try to see the introduction video. Thank you very much, Maliti. Thank you very much, Jakob. And the introduction video for the theme of today, let's see if we can get this rolling. We had a hiccup in the beginning. Senator Du.
In this fourth film of the series, we will look at the transportation and energy sectors. Transportation is responsible for around 15% of the global total emissions. The transportation sector can halve their emissions by 2030. There are economically viable solutions available, but ambitious coordinated measures between industry and the public sector are needed to make a quick implementation of the solutions. Now, it's moving too slow. More than 70% of the transportation emissions come from short journeys, mainly in and around cities, in cars, motorbikes, buses and trucks. Economically viable technologies exist that can entirely replace these with new services for accessibility and mobility. Clean mass transit systems and zero-emissions vehicles could already now be employed in cities, which would lead to a significant reduction of the world's total emissions. At the same time, the air in the cities would be so much cleaner, and every year millions of lives could be saved, people that die prematurely because of air pollution. However, an appropriate incentive structure for the swift implementation is missing. The transition to electrical transportation has to speed up. Governments play an important role in supporting and incentivizing the transition by building the required infrastructure. Further recommendations to governments are to support home offices and co-working hubs closer to home, as well as car sharing. And one of the biggest opportunities to dramatically reduce emissions in the transportation sector is shifting to 100% electric light vehicle sales by 2030. transportation sector as a whole has the possibility to halve their emissions by 2030, but it requires that policies and support from the government are put in place now. We've now looked at the 4 different sectors: transportation, buildings, industry, and food production, that together represent the world's total emissions. We see that all these sectors have the potential to halve their emissions by 2030, and accordingly, the world's total emissions could be halved by 2030. This does not mean that every nation in the world has to reduce emissions by 50%. The rich countries emit significantly more greenhouse gases and must reduce their emissions by 65 to 70% by 2030. But as a whole, the world needs to reduce its emissions by 50% by 2030 to halt global temperature rise well below 2 degrees. Now, we will talk about energy and how fast renewable energy can be put in place and be delivered to people and industries in sufficient amounts.
So, renewable energy is on an exponential trajectory. Solar and wind are growing at a rate of 15% a year. And at this pace, renewable energy installations double every 3 years. So if we keep following this trajectory, it's possible for at least 50% of electricity production to come from renewables before the end of this decade. And the cost of solar has dropped something like 90% in a decade, and this trend is set to continue. So what is required from our governments not to block this amazing development? Firstly, they need to remove the destructive fossil subsidies. They should end all new fossil investments. They should set national targets in line with what is required by science, which means halving emissions by 2030.
Basically, governments have this sort of very linear thinking on the economy that to grow an economy you need to supply more and more energy. You must supply that energy as cheaply as possible, and then that will drive industry, and it will drive job creation and growth in the country. So this is very much this sort of industrial revolution. Nothing's really changed in like 100, 150 years on that thinking. But of course, everything has changed over the last few years, where now it's actually cheaper to build a renewable energy power plant in most places than it is to keep an existing fossil fuel powered plant going. So the economics is just crazy. That's just a game changer for coal. Coal cannot survive even with heavy subsidies to the coal industry. We're in a really interesting position right now. The energy transition will be much faster, and it can be accelerated if we just remove these crazy subsidies we're giving to the fossil fuel industry.
If the world would like to continue to produce goods, transport merchandise, and ourselves, it must be a top priority for the leaders to put renewable energy systems in place with sufficient amount of energy and make it accessible for everyone. The products we buy, the way we heat our homes, the things we do in our daily living must all be charged by energy that is not dangerous and depletes the planet. And this cannot come true without strong policies from the governments.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce on stage the founder and CEO of We Don't Have Time, Ingmar Rentzhog.
Thank you, Katarina.
Well, wonderful to see you as always. So Ingmar, please tell us about the app and the activity on it.
Yes. First, I want to explain very quick the concept. The We Don't Have Time app is a review platform for the climate. The We Don't Have Time platform is a review platform for the climate. And on our platform, you can talk directly with business leaders and board leaders about how they are actually performing. So if you see something you don't like, you think they should stop doing it, you can send a climate warning. And my team will contact the company or the leader and have them to answer. But you can also send a climate love when you see something that is great climate action. And we will do the same, and we will share this love to everyone, so more people will be inspired to act. This is the basic concept on the We Don't Have Time platform. And so far, we have gotten answers from everything from presidents to Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, business leaders, governmental organizations, and many, many more. So if you want to have a climate dialogue and change the world, you can do it by downloading the app. Search for We Don't Have Time. And I would like also to highlight some love in the platform actually today. And this is a love that goes to International Energy Agency that we had here previously, because they have done something awesome. They have done a calculation. They crunched the numbers about all the pledges we have so far in the COP26 meeting. And they figured out that if those pledges will be implemented, we will have only 1.8 degrees warming. So we only need 0.3 degrees more. But
those are pledges.
Those are pledges. And I think that's great. But as long as this number you see here continue to increase, we are pledging with one hand and we're giving money to the fossil fuel industry we want to shut down with the other hand. Money talks. We need to have money behind the pledges. So therefore, we are giving the G20 countries a climate warning because they are only pledging to get rid of those subsidies, but they're not doing it. It's time to act and get rid of those crazy subsidies. Otherwise, we will all become extinct like the dinosaurs.
Well, thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog. And please go into the app and support these the warnings and the loves to get this really lots of voices behind these incentives here. Let's now move into the section of transformers. Achieving the Paris Agreement requires transformation in all sectors of society. Business have no choice but to transform and adapt to reach the Paris Agreement. And if they don't do this, they will be left behind. We are now going to meet some key actors here that lead the way in the energy and the transport sector. We have 2 keynote presentations followed by a panel. And again, please send in questions to the panelists on the app. And it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Niklas Heuveldop. He is CEO and NA of Ericsson. You have the floor, Niklas.
Thank you for hosting me at this 4th Exponential Climate Action Summit. It's great to be back. But to be honest, I would have really loved to see more progress between last year and standing here today. According to the latest UN emission gap report, we're currently on track to reduce our CO2 emissions by only 7.5% by 2030, 7.5. According to the Paris Agreement, and to meet the goals we set back then, we would have to see a 55% reduction. So we're significantly behind our original plan. And what that essentially means is that we're currently tracking towards a 2.7 degrees centigrade average temperature increase during this century, which is significantly above the 1.5 degree target that we had set for ourselves as a ceiling. And that is very likely to lead to catastrophic effects across environment and society. So, for this year's COP26, we absolutely need to see resolute commitments and firm action that policymakers and business leaders will commit to. We absolutely need to act, and we need to act now. We understand at Ericsson that we are a small part of the CO2 emissions. As a fact, our industry across Ericsson, our ecosystem, and our customers only represents about 1.7% of the global CO2 emissions. But the technologies that we produce, the services our customers offer, have the potential to impact at least 15% and probably much more of the global CO2 emissions across industries. But let me start by talking about what we are doing at Ericsson. We remain firmly committed to our net zero ambitions by 2030 of our own operations. And we're tracking well. As a matter of fact, over the last 5 years, we've seen a 71% reduction across our own operations. And let me talk to you about one particular example that I'm really proud of. It is our 5G smart factory that we opened in Louisville, Texas, about a year ago. And that is our first smart factory operation. And already in its first year of operation, we've seen significant triple bottom line impact that is very encouraging that I would like to share with you here today. In terms of profit, we have seen a 2.2x improvement in employee profitability, a 75% reduction in lead times. On the people side, we're able to leverage now AR and machine learning to train our people remotely and for our workers in the factory to take on increasingly complex tasks with remote support and augmented reality learning. And on the planet side, which is really what we're focused at here today, we've seen a 24% reduction in power consumption for a comparable site. All of that energy is now produced with renewable energies, and we've seen a 75% reduction in water consumption in our site as well. By moving our production closer to our customers, we now also see a 5x reduction in average delivery distance, and we can go from air freight to surface transport. So also that has a significant environmental impact. Our Lighthouse factory has been recognized by World Economic Forum as one of 7 Lighthouse programs in the US, one of 90 globally, that then becomes a role model for fourth generation industrial revolution factory sites. In addition to that, World Economic Forum has recognized our site for the work we've done on the sustainability side. So we're now 1 out of 3 global sustainability lighthouses, according to World Economic Forum. And we have secured our first LEED Gold certification for this particular factory, the most recognized global green building standard. And we're well underway to reach LEED Zero certification with this operation. So I'm just very proud of what our people and partners have been able to put together here, and the commitment and broad engagement that we see across our extended team and our partners to stand up this reference factory. I'm really excited about some of the lessons we have learned in working with partners across our extended ecosystem and how those partnerships can actually allow us and enable us to transform other industries. So 2 industries that come to mind here today, of course, is the energy sector. The energy sector represents over 66% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And they have a very ambitious target to pivot to 80% renewables by 2050. In order to go through that transformation, the energy industry will have to shift from few sites, high capacity sites, to a much more distributed production grid with wind farms, solar farms. And to be able to manage that very distributed production environment going forward, the energy sector will depend on advanced communication solutions so that the different manufacturing sites are connected, that any risk to performance, the integrity of the operation is discovered early with predictive, prescriptive maintenance tools, sensors connected across the network on the one hand side. And you will also then have to rely on sensors, connectivity, and smart grid type solutions to be able to detect where the demand in your network will be so that the right energy is available at the right time and distributed in the most optimum way, which also means, for instance, in the case of our factory, that on weekends when we may not be operating, we can actually feed energy back into the grid. So again, very different solutions that the energy sector will have to deploy over the next coming years, and connectivity plays a pivotal role in that transformation. Another sector that is also undergoing significant transformation is the transportation sector. 16% contribution to the global CO2 emissions, so another significant contributor. The opportunity that we see together with our partners is that you can reduce the CO2 emissions by at least 50% already by 2030. It will require deep and broad partnerships across the extended ecosystem, and for instance, allow us then to make the CO2 emissions, the footprint, visible to consumers. So we need to be able to highlight between goods being produced in a factory, transported across the value chain, the supply chain, to eventually ending up in a shop, what is the CO2 footprint of that product? And if we can make that visible to consumers, that should raise the awareness, the consciousness, and hopefully also the action by consumers. We're working together with Eonride, Telia, and freight forwarder Schenker in Sweden on an all-electric autonomous transport system, which has been a really interesting experiment where we have looked at optimizing the uptime of a truck, optimizing logistics flows and routes so that you can really increase the productivity of your fleet. And by doing it with electric vehicles, we've seen a 90% reduction in CO2 emissions and an elimination of nitrogen oxide. This is not, of course, very much based on the Swedish electricity mix, but another really encouraging pilot and example of how technology can enable the transformation of sectors. In the US, we see a very interesting collaboration between Eonride and GE Appliances, where they're experimenting with the first US fleet of autonomous and electric trucks. And according to GE Appliances' own estimates, they are expecting to see a 970 tons reduction of their CO2 emissions in the first year of operation. And we're, of course, very proud to be supporting this as yet another super interesting experiment on how our technologies can contribute the digital transformation in industries to accelerate the sustainable development in each of those industries. Well, I hope that these examples and success stories that we have been creating here now over the last year serve as an inspiration for you. Not because they may directly apply to what you're doing, but because some of the underlying enabling technologies can be reused across industries. We will continue working with our partners across the extended ecosystem to continue piloting these type of reference and showcases that others then can build on. We hope that with this effort, we can contribute to sustainable climate action across all industries, because the facts are undisputable, and we really need to see ourselves taking a 50% reduction between now and 2030, another 50% reduction up until 2040, in order to reach a net zero emission commitment by 2050. We are running out of time, and we have to act firmly now. We're open for innovation. We want to meet with you and our extended ecosystem of partners. We have our Imagine Possible studios around the world, and we would love to see you to collaborate and innovate and see how we can help you transform your operations to see similar sustainability improvements that we have been able to experience with our partners. We're counting on you, and our children are counting on us. Let's do this.
Well, thank you very much, Niklas Heuveldop, of course, CEO of North America, Ericsson. Ericsson in North America, just to clarify. And I'd like now to move on to the next speaker, who is from E.ON. It's Stefan Håkansson, who's Global Director of City Energy Solutions and CEO of E.ON Business Solutions. And he is with us here on Zoom. Stefan Håkansson is the Global Director of E.ON Infrastructure Solutions, and he has over 20 years of experience in the energy sector. And he's a world leader in the push for the development of sustainable energy infrastructure solutions. So I hand over to you now, Stefan, for a keynote.
I'm very happy to follow this fantastic speech linking to transportation and what we actually can achieve when we put all our efforts to it. What I now will cover is what we have been doing, achieving a lot faster transformation towards sustainability when we apply a true circular thinking. The circularity is based on actually reusing our resources more than once and using it in a much more efficient way. When we do it right, we really believe we can reduce the primary energy need for cities and partly industries. And over time, we can come to a conclusion where we don't need more primary energy than we use today. How can that happen? So what I want to share with you all today is one of the examples we embarked on 10 years ago in northern part of Stockholm. What we actually had as a vision is a cradle-to-cradle solution for our way of handling waste. We see that there is a way of looking at waste in a way that is wrong. You see it as a problem. You see it as something you need to get rid of. And this we need to change. We start looking at the waste as actually resources, material that can be reused in a much better way. It's complicated because there's many stakeholders involved in the whole cycle of reusing material and also coming from waste. We need to agree on a platform of how to do it. Our vision long-term in northern part of Stockholm is that the people that live in this place, they will sort their waste, today's resources that will be used again and again, in a way where they will get rewarded. The way we want to do that is when they are sorting what's today then waste, we will use these fractions and use the value that is created and recycle all the things that can be recycled. And once we land in a situation when we have recycled the material that can be reused in the society, we take the residual and energy recycle the rest. From that, for instance, the food waste comes into a biomethane production unit. One bag of food waste, one brown bag of food waste, allows this biomethane to drive one standard Volkswagen Passat 2.3 kilometers. We're already producing 60 gigawatt hours a year in this facility with food waste coming from the northern part of Stockholm. Once that food waste is producing biomethane, it also has two more residuals. One residual goes actually to fertilizing of acres that is being used from farming and really reusing the material. The second part is containing some metals and other areas, other subjects that we do not want to let out in the nature. This second residual, we put into combustion. And when doing so, we produce both electricity and heating. And the residual metals goes into the ashes that we recycle. The heating and the electricity goes back to the customers living in the northern part of Stockholm. We want to close the circle by having a new business model coming online where the people living in northern part of Stockholm is paying for the energy, electricity and heating, depending on how good they are in sorting their waste. This is really a new business model. This is really something that is changing the dynamics. We already have two real estate companies in the northern part of Stockholm that approached us and asked if they can buy a share of this circular system. Why is that? They believe when having an ownership of this circular system, the price for their apartments will be much more worth. It's driving the mindset of the inhabitants and also driving the force forward to do more circularity and drive that in a really good way. This is how we can do that Sorry, because of the delay, I'm in a situation where I could not join from the normal speaking platform. So I'm calling in from my phone. Where are we today? We worked a lot with the circular system. We worked a lot with the stakeholders in Stockholm. That's the municipalities. Actually, 4 municipalities are involved. That's the collecting companies to collect today's waste and to be able to use the resources in the most optimal way. It's about all the inhabitants living there. It's about the real estate companies that are building flats and apartments. It's about also the general part of the society, media, schools, to get the public acceptance for this circularity. And we start seeing some of the people living there being more and more proud. It's proud for achieving something that is saving not only CO2, but increasing to a new level of efficiency. This kind of circular structures, why is it not implemented much more? Why does it take so long time to do? The answer to that is it has regulatory obstacles, and all stakeholders need to join the movement and agree that this is the way forward. And that's very, very challenging. We're now up to almost 12 years with this circular system in Northern Stockholm. It's been in operation for 15 months, and we see it's truly working. We now use this as a framework to decarbonize in Poland, in UK, and also starting in Germany next year. And we see we can do it much more, much faster. It doesn't need to take that long. And if we do it properly, we will not only reduce the CO2, we will also be able to export this thinking to other parts of our world. And that's how we will change the world to go faster towards sustainability. And that's why I'm so happy that I'm able to join, despite I'm sitting here in a car and waiting to go to the next appointment. Thank you very much. And now I'm open for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Stefan. I have a question for you regarding the business model. Which are the major challenges with this new, very interesting business model that you just spoke of?
First, there are regulatory challenges. Are we allowed to track how people are sorting their waste, the personal integrity? So we need to agree with every single person that is part of the system that we can track how the waste today is being sorted and measure that. Also being able to measure the value of it. The second challenge is that the local regulatory rules is different in the different parts, also inside each country. You need to be very close to the local municipality, and you need to get into very long-term agreements of how to handle this. And that's very complicated, takes a long time to agree, and there's no standardized approach of how to deal with that. We are requesting the politicians to look into this circularity and these targets models of really how we can use these resources and look at it as resources instead of looking at it as waste. These are the 2 biggest challenges we're facing when embarking on this journey.
Well, thank you very much, Stefan, for joining us. The sound came over just fine, even if you were in a vehicle. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Likewise. I am now turning to Stockholm, where we have our next key speaker, Erik Rylander. He is head of Stockholm Data Parks and Carbon Dioxide Removal at Stockholm Exergy. And you have our attention, Erik Rylander, in Stockholm. So over to Stockholm. See if we can connect, if I can hear Erik in the studio in Stockholm. We have a studio, we don't have time studio in Stockholm. And there will be Stockholm Exergy that has a presentation ready for us with Erik Rylander presenting. Let's see if we can connect over to Stockholm. See, there he is. Well, you have our attention, Erik Rylander.
Thank you very much. Are my slides also available? So are they seen right now? Oh, there they are. Yes. So
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. My name is Erik Rylander. I'm the head of carbon dioxide removal at Stockholm Exergy, and I will give you a short keynote on negative emissions and how that is the next step to climate mitigation. So please, the next slide. Now it's gone, I think. Okay, so Stockholm Exergy, we are a heating and cooling provider here in Stockholm, and our production is already today 99% fossil fuel free, and based on renewables and it comes from renewable and recovered sources. The next step now, though, is to move towards removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So with BECCS, which is Bioenergy, Carbon Capture and Storage, on our existing heat plants, we will be able to contribute to the 1.5 degree target. And one can wonder, what then is BECCS? Well, BECCS, as I said, Bioenergy, Carbon Capture and Storage, is really about utilizing the fact that plants and trees bind CO2 out of the atmosphere as they grow using the photosynthesis. We produce heat in Stockholm using residues from the forest industry, that is bark, roots, branches from the trees, the parts of the trees that cannot be used, for example, for construction material. When we produce energy from this and capture the CO2, and permanently store this in the earth crust outside the coast of Norway, we will actually have taken the carbon dioxide that the trees have absorbed while growing out of the atmosphere. So why is this important? Well, in the SR15 report, IPCC presented 90 different scenarios on how we can be consistent with a 1.5 degree target. Out of these 90 scenarios, 78 were analyzed in more detail. And out of these 78, 73 depend on BECCS in parallel, obviously, with massive fossil emission reductions, but they would depend on BECCS to reach net zero. And why is that? The fact is that even when we are net zero, we will need carbon dioxide removal, because there are processes in our society today representing about 10% of the emissions that we have that will be very hard to abate. So even long term, when we are at net zero, we will need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in order to stay zero. Next slide, please. So what we are going to do here in Stockholm is that we are going to implement BECCS on our largest heat unit. With this BECCS unit, we will separate 800,000 tons of biogenic CO2 from the atmosphere every year. 800,000 tons, that is on par with the emissions from the traffic in Stockholm on a yearly basis. To realize this project, we need to secure the necessary revenue. That revenue would need to come from the carbon removal certificates that we will be creating when we have put the carbon away. Initially, there will be some governmental funding for this. There will also hopefully be funding from the European Innovation Fund, where we are in the last stage, and we are hoping to be awarded by the end of this month. But apart from this, we will also need private funding, offtake from the voluntary carbon market. And this is an ongoing dialogue at this point. Next slide, please. So, to sum up, negative emissions will not solve the climate crisis, but they will be necessary to reach net zero. Therefore, we need to start to build this industry now in order to be ready and up to scale by the 2040s. So to contribute to reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement, every company, in parallel with their reducing of fossil emissions should also identify its residual emissions, what will most likely be there also approaching 2050, and start buying removals to compensate for those, and in that way to contribute to the negative emission, the emergence of the negative emission industry, which we will desperately need to become and stay net zero. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erik Rylander, joining us from the hub in Stockholm. We are now moving into a panel discussion, and I have panelists lined up for us here, very exciting panelists indeed. And I'm turning now to Andreas Follier, Head of Sustainability at Scania. Andreas is specialist in CSR and Sustainable Development and Business Development. I can see you are with us here. Excellent. And I'd also like to introduce here with us in Glasgow, Morten Bo Christiansen, Vice President, Head of Decarbonization at Maersk. And Morten joined AP Møller Maersk in 2011 and headed the company's strategy unit between 2015 and 2020 during what is broadly regarded one of the biggest transformations in European industry in recent years. So a warm welcome to Morten Bo Christiansen.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us. May I say on board?
Yes.
Yes, excellent, excellent. So Andreas Arens is also with us here in Glasgow. He is Head of Climate at IKEA Group, and he leads the climate agenda for this huge company and also the full IKEA value chain. And he's the main spokesperson for the entire climate agenda in IKEA. So please join us here, Andreas. Great to have you both with us, and great to have Andreas here on the other side on Zoom. So, I'd like to start with you, Morten. Let's see here. You were appointed Head of Decarbonization. That's quite a fantastic title, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I like it.
It's wonderful. Yes. So please tell us in brief, what does that mean? What is your trajectory? What have you achieved so far at Maersk?
So I have the pleasure of leading a team of around 60 people, and our role is basically to make sure that we decarbonize our company and the supply chain of our customers as soon as practically possible. It is obviously something that requires everyone in the company, so my team is really all about collaboration, but we are developing the visions, we make the strategies and the roadmaps, and also hopefully make sure that it happens.
Thank you very much, Morten. And Andreas, you lead the Connected Strategic Initiative to secure that really IKEA develops the organization that is needed to make the strategic commitments here. And your goal is to become climate positive by 2030. And of course, you might wonder, in this huge company, how will these goals be met?
That's a good question. And I think coming back to leading the strategic initiative, I would say setting the goals and the baseline is kind of the easy part. And then the tough journey is how you implement and develop organization as you have. And for us, it's been really important to work a lot with scenario analysis. So if you take the total footprint of IKEA, how to break it down into Lego pieces. And then you can also forecast what is the impact of future business growth, as well as what happens if we move into zero emission fuels and ocean shipping, what happens if we go into plant-based food, what happens if we make our LED bulbs even more energy efficient, and then we can see how much can we actually manage the absolute greenhouse gas emissions. And what we're doing now is to work together with business leaders all across IKEA so that they create their own specific climate roadmaps. So instead of you should reduce your footprint by 40%, you know I need to do these 3 actions by that date, and that has this impact. So it becomes concrete and actionable.
Thank you very much. And I'm turning now to the other Andreas here at Scania. In terms of being a transformer, which we're talking about here, which are your main actions already in place and forward?
Well, I think that for Scania it's all about continue to develop and promote the technology that would lead us to decarbonize transport system. I mean, already today all our solutions, all our vehicles can run on alternatives to diesel, but of course that's not enough. The solutions of the future will be electric, and we need to develop those technologies. By 2025, we aim at having 10% of our total volumes being electric. And by 2030, almost 50% of our volumes, at least in Europe, will be able to run on electricity, and hopefully renewable electricity. And I think it's all about adoption now. I mean, the technology is there. We're serial producing trucks and buses today. And very soon, all our customers, all the segments we're serving, all applications will be able to run with zero emissions. And now it's all about adoption. It's all about getting the infrastructure in place, getting the financing solutions in place so our customers can afford the increased capex, and you know, just deciding that this is the way forward. And then I think it can go more rapidly than any of us thinks.
Thank you, Andreas. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into the aspect of value chains. How is this working for you? Is it push? Is it pull? How is the transition in all of your value chains happening?
Well, for us, at this point, with the solutions today, 95% of our carbon emissions comes from the user phase, so downstream from us. And that's where we put most of our focus, of course. The interesting thing is that when we are moving towards zero emission vehicles, the balance will shift to upstream, to our supply chain. And the hotspots there, of course, will be batteries, but also cast iron and steel and aluminum. And we're working extremely ambitiously now to work with our suppliers to mitigate also those emissions. But when we're talking about transport and the big challenge we have in front of us, of course, it's downstream. And then we need to create, we call it chains of demand. We need to put demand on each other up and down the value streams to actually be able to promote these solutions. And it's like Andreas from IKEA, maybe you need to pay a little bit more for transports in the future. I know you already are doing that, and you're a great example of an ambitious companies in this field. But I think we need to work together to put demands on each other. That's how we get the uptake of these solutions.
Thank you, Scania, Andreas, if I may call you that. I'm turning now to Morten.
The non-Andreas, yeah.
Yes, the only Morten here. Is IKEA paying enough for the transport in terms of supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's IKEA has made it very clear that they are leading in this space, but also that it needs to be economically feasible, and I couldn't agree more. It is, of course, more expensive, certainly in the beginning. So there is an area that we need to bridge, because these new green fuels, they are more expensive. But over time, well, who knows what happens to the oil price, but for sure, building on renewable energy cost is going to come down. But there is a period where it'll cost a bit more. And you can, of course, you can look at it from the side that these fuels will probably be 2 to 3 times more expensive. If we look at our company, we have a fuel bill of $5 to $6 billion. That sounds very scary. But if you actually look at it from the other side, the freight rate will maybe increase 10-15%. And if you look at I don't know, you don't make sneakers, but if you take a pair of sneakers, it's 5 cents on a pair of sneakers, right? So from that perspective, you know, it doesn't sound scary. And I'm quite sure we will find a good model with IKEA. I mean, IKEA is really leading the way here. You have, among other things, you have been part of this cargo owners for zero emission vessels, saying that by 2040, you will buy nothing but zero carbon, and that's just a huge help. So I'm sure we will figure that out.
Would you like to add?
No, but I think building on the added costs, I think first of all, I mean, sustainability cannot be a luxury for the few. I mean, we need to make sure that everybody can afford it, and I think that's also a key part of a just transition. We cannot make it more affordable for the many. It needs to be affordable, and also I think it was a key difference is also if it's an added running cost or is it a temporary increased cost where we invest in new technology to make to scale it up as well. And I think that's also why I'm so happy that we jointly agreed with cargo vessels for zero emission fuels, where we aim to only purchase zero emission ocean transports by 2040. And the key part here is to achieve the zero emission fuels, and we need to actually get them massively scalable as well. It's not just that they're semi-available, we need to have it available on a massive scale, and also finding the right infrastructure as well. And a key part then also making those zero emission fuels competitive as well, in so many ways, including costs.
So we need plenty and we need them fast.
Yeah, but the key why we work on both directions, both on, you can say, on a supplier as well as also us as a procurer of these services.
This leads me to ask you about business models, and I'm going to turn to Andreas here in Scania. Do we need to develop new business models in order to make this transition happen?
I think so. And coming back to the conversation we just had, I think it's not only about cost, it's also about risks when we're entering into new technologies. And I think we need to find business models that take that into consideration, that we need to be more, we need to share risk in a better way. And I can foresee business models that I know that IKEA is already into and that we want to explore further, where transport buyers are actually making pledges or commitments to buy a certain amount of cargo, and then you can then invest, or fossil-free freight, you can say, and then the transporters can invest, or a third party can make an investment in a fleet of zero-emission vehicles, and that's how we can share risks. And I think that's probably the way of the future, because these solutions comes with a higher upfront cost, and if we can share that risk, then I'm sure we can find ways to find leasing models, financing models, risk-sharing models that would speed up the transition.
Thank you. What would you like to say about sharing risks and developing new business models, Morten?
No, I would agree with Scania, Andreas. I think across the supply chains, there will most definitely be a lot of new business models coming up. On the land side, trucking in the future with autonomous trucks and so on, it's going to be a whole different game than it is today. And I very much also agree on the risk-sharing piece, which I think also is why this commitment that from our customers to say, we want these products, we will support you on it. That allows us to look at the fuel suppliers and say, all right, we'll buy it and put it on our vessels, right? So that's really how you de-risk the value chain. And I think that it's only by collaborating like that we will solve this problem.
Thank you, Morten. Andreas?
Yeah, I would say, just in addition to the business model, I think partnerships is critical as well. So I also need to find new ways of doing business together. As IKEA, we're a very, very small player in the ocean industry as well. But by finding other companies who have joint visions and we have similar goals, we can work together and really find how can we address going from the challenges and finding the solutions to them. And there are many ways to address them as well. But it's by working together with more on a partnership level that we can really realize these solutions.
So Andreas, what would you say are the major blockers, the roadblocks, if I may say, to make this happen? And how do we remove them?
It really depends on where in the value chain you are, because I would say each part of our footprint has its own opportunities and their own challenges. But if sitting with Morten is here close by me, let's focus a bit on ocean industry. But I think right now it's the availability of zero-emission fuels. They don't exist. And we need to find the fuels, we need to find the infrastructure, and we also need the policies to also work in the same way to enable these as well. That's like one of them. But it's also huge capital investments, right?
Yes. But I think actually, if I can just build on what Andreas said, that I think actually one of the big roadblocks is being removed by exactly what IKEA and others have done by saying, listen, we want this, there's a demand out there, we're putting demand in the market, because then we will find those fuels, and then we will start rolling. And honestly, 6 months ago, a year ago, it was kind of this chicken and egg type situation where nobody would build a green vessel because there was no green fuels, no one would make the green fuels because there were no green vessels, right? And then you go nowhere. now we are moving, and we will get going. So I mean, it's a scaling challenge, and you said it, Andreas, it's going to scale massively, right? But that's all the more reason to get started as soon as possible, I think.
And then it's nice to be on top of the game.
Yeah,
one of the key actors that are already starting, right?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, I think it's of course always a little bit challenging to move first, but I actually think in this situation, I mean, it may be a little bit challenging, but if you move the last, that may actually be devastating for your business, to be honest.
It's the classic first mover's advantage.
We hope so.
We hope so, yes. Andreas, Scania, major roadblocks for you in this transition, from Scania's perspective?
Well, first of all, as we have discussed, infrastructure for charging. This is not a chicken and egg problem anymore for us. The vehicles are there, and they will be increasingly so in the next coming years. Just let's get the infrastructure in place. We have now decided, together with our competitors, to invest 500 million euros in it ourselves to create 1,700 at least high-speed charging points in Europe. Then price on carbon can in many different forms. We need it on road tolls, for instance, in energy taxation, but we need to have a proper price on carbon if we're going to make this real. That takes in the full cost of fossils. And then thirdly, and this is important also in our sector, renewable fuels. I mean, even if we succeed with an extremely ambitious target of having 50% of our volumes being electrified by 2030, that will only constitute 10% of the rolling fleet in Europe at that year. So we have solutions here and now. Biogas from waste, HVO from waste, that can be used here and now. And we just need to scale those solutions. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to reach the 1.5 degree scenario.
Thank you, Andreas. I have one more question for you before we turn to Nairobi. So stay alert. They've had some problems with power in Mount Kenya University, where we have our hub in Nairobi. So let's hope they can hang in there and stay with us. But before we turn to Nairobi, I'd like to ask all three of you, what are your hopes from your perspective of the outcomes of the COP, Morten?
Well, we are obviously not part of the political negotiations, but what I do see is a lot of companies and the private sector really leaning in here. And I think that is something that we are in control of, and I'm seeing a lot of that. So I hope that momentum will continue. And then, of course, I also hope the best for the political negotiations, but that is a bit more outside of my area of expertise.
But maybe they can feel the push from.
No, absolutely. I think so. I mean, the more push from the private sector, the harder it will be to drag your feet as a politician, that's for sure.
Andreas?
No, but I would only echo what Morten's saying. I mean, I hope as many companies as possible are, I would say, committing to net zero latest 2050, but even more importantly, cutting emissions in half in absolute terms by 2030. No excuses for the entire value chain of a business, because we need the emission reductions right here and now if we want to align with science. Then, of course, what Andreas wanted, infrastructure. We are still dependent on states, so that also that NDCs as far as possible are aligned with 1.5, but also that we get also concrete actions out of it as well, because that's where infrastructure will also happen as well.
Thank you. How about Andreas Scania? What are your hopes?
What we're seeing now is that companies and sectors are putting science-based carbon reduction targets, and we're not seeing all the countries of the world doing the same thing. I would say that the NDCs needs to be sharp and needs to be aligned with the 1.5 degree scenarios. Everything else is an embarrassment, quite frankly. But you know, we shouldn't be naive either. I mean, there is differences between countries in this world, and I think the developed world, need to step up also and make sure that we are doing our part to financing this transition.
Well, thank you. And pointing this way to the plenaries, the jury is still out there to see what will be the outcome of this COP, of course. Let's now turn to Nairobi, to Dr. Robert Ngunde Josephine, and see what questions we have from the hub at Mount Kenya, Washington. Mount Kenya University.
Mount Kenya University. Thank you very much, Catalina. Unfortunately, we are not able to join you within the first round, and we had very interesting questions. So I want to allow some of the participants we've had in the audience to ask questions, and we are going to start with Rukia. Rukia?
Hi there.
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Rukia Ahmed, a student at Mount Kenya University doing Bachelor of Education Science, and I am a young climate activist. My question is, what measures are put in place to implement carbon pricing policy in the most transparent way with emissions? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer this one?
So just make sure we get the question right. It was about what it takes to implement a carbon price?
Carbon pricing, the most transparent ways of implementing carbon pricing.
I think from our perspective, I think actually just a tax on carbon would be helpful because it would level the playing field. For the ocean part of our business, we are regulated under the United Nations, the International Maritime Organization. So we really hope that they will do that. Right now, it's not moving fast enough in that area. But again, hopefully we can put some pressure on that. But that is our perspective. If we do that, I think even our CEO have said that it should be around $150 per ton. Then we would actually have leveled the playing field, and we would be able to speed up. And then that proceed can then be used to also make sure that we get a fair transition.
Level the playing field.
Yes.
That would be terrific. Let's take one more question from Nairobi.
Yes, Kevin.
Hello. My name is Kevin. I have a question now. We know Kenya has a UN headquarters, and my question goes because the UN headquarters and mostly UNEP, because UNEP is headquartered in Kenya, we see that they use fuel gas all around Kenya, and they are the guys that are supposed to be championing green energy, green transportation. Yet they are not that, and you usually see that mostly even on companies that support or even say that they are supporting climate change. They are doing something of climate change, having big cars. And my question goes, when does the talk stop, and when does the action start? And my other question is, what laws or what policies are being put to guys who are using, to guys who are producing chips, something like lithium, because they get those materials mostly from Africa, and they are gotten from maybe either stolen or from ill-mannered ways. What are the policies that have been set? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's your question is very much about following through and walking the talk and not but really delivering on what these companies and players say they will be doing. So Andreas, comments?
Yeah, I would say first of all, cutting the emissions in half, or the entire emissions in line with 1.5, it's a massive challenge, and I would say some will be short term to implement, some mid-term, and some long-term as well. So I think it's also key to separate the agenda based on that time horizon. And then I think coming to the long-term development, I think the ocean industry to move that to zero emissions, I would say that's a long-term agenda. Internally, we have taken very strong short-term action by actually creating a plant-based version of our famous meatball, which is as tasty, or if not even tastier.
They're very tasty.
We also said a massive increase of energy efficiency of already energy-efficient LED bulbs as well. And we've also seen a big increase in the consumption of renewable electricity in the manufacturing of IKEA products. So there are certain things which are a bit quicker to address, but I think that's also the low-hanging fruits. Some are not so maybe so low-hanging, but then we will come closer and closer to a more long-term agenda. We need to start with those roadmaps now because it's massive transformation that's needed ahead. So everything needs to be done now, but some will have a result later.
And I understand also that the question was also related to transparency and material flows, raw material resources out of the continent of Africa. So let's see if we have any comments on this one from Andreas at Scania. Transparency.
I think that's a great question. we need to make sure now that we're not building a system, building value chains here that puts the burden where it shouldn't be. I mean, we need to make this transition, not creating more problems elsewhere. So when it comes to lithium, cobalt, rare earth minerals that are crucial for electrifying transport, then we make sure that we have very clear demands and very clear requirements when we're sourcing that. And then the next step, of course, is to recycle, to actually mine the system and not the earth, and make sure that we are sourcing those metals and minerals from the batteries that are in rotation. We're not there yet. We're still producing much more than is out there, but the good news is that all lithium-ion batteries, 100% are recyclable and will be recycled. So that's where we will get around a little bit of that problematic that you raised.
Well, thank you very much, Andreas from Scania, and thank you very much, Andreas from IKEA, and also Morten from Maersk. Thank you so much for joining us here at the We Don't Have Time stage at the Nordic Pavilion, and thanks very much to all the hub in Kenya for excellent questions. And we will now listen to a message from to the world leaders from UNDP.
Hi, my name is Ejan, and I'm an agri-journalist from Kazakhstan. I was born in Semey City. We have beautiful, incredible winter, but unfortunately, after 2 days, the snow becomes black because of central heating systems. I understand that it harms not only my health and health of my community, but also it contributes to climate change. I am asking all global leaders to make faster decisions in order to transform central heating systems to alternative energy.
All right, it seems like the video got a little bit stuck there at the end, but beautiful message to the world leaders and we have different voices, different days here to bring these messages on to the world leaders. And now I'd like to introduce again Ingmar Rentzhog, the CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, to talk a bit about the activity on our app. So please join us, Ingmar Rentzhog.
What's going on in the app?
Yes, please tell us.
What's going on in the app is very much discussion about that it's more expensive with green energy, and we heard it in this panel just before. And that's true. If you want to buy the green solutions today, the green energy today, you need to pay more very often. You that follow those broadcasts we do here from COP will maybe think I'm repeating myself, but I will do that until it stops.
Until this clock stops.
Because the reason why green energy is more expensive is that our governments around the world is sponsoring the fossil energy. So if you take away the sponsorship, these fossil fuel subsidies, it will be cheaper with green alternatives. And that will be the normal, that will be the norm, and that will scale very, very fast. People complain about that it's more expensive when they should complain about the unfairness and how rigged and corrupt the economic system actually are. It's rigged for the fossil fuels. We need to end that. And if we do that, it's really simple. Another thing that our platform plays a huge role here is that we have seen throughout the whole week here that so many amazing solutions. It's actually a lot of business leaders that are implementing, doing stuff for real, not just talking about it, but doing stuff for real. But I think most of them are failing. Because if they only work on their own solution and their own implementing of the solution without communicating that to the world, we will get stuck in the old world. So this is something I encourage everyone.
About inspiration.
We need to speak out, not about what's wrong with the society. We need also to speak out what's great with society, what we can do, and we need to brag about the achievements. We're not perfect, no one is perfect, but we need to brag when we're doing steps on the way, and that's one of the biggest reasons I founded We Don't Have Time. We Don't Have Time is the largest platform for climate solutions, and I invite everyone on the stage we have here and everyone that are working actively to solve the climate crisis to join us as a partner and become active. And I'm very pleased to see that our number of partners are increasing all the time.
Well, thank you very much, Imre Rensog. And I'm now going to hand over to my co-host, Nick Nuttall, for the next segment.
Breaking the bonds from the past few centuries is going to require disruptor businesses. It's going to require innovations, technologies, and disruptive policies. The energy sector and the transport sector are no exception to this. And here we're going to hear about some of the disruptions that are happening, some of the companies that are doing it, and some of the initiatives needed to disrupt the economy towards our goal of a climate-safe world. I'd like to invite, for a keynote speech, Pamela Jouvin, sounds very good, you know, the way I did it. Either way, I think it's fine. From the SME, that's the Small and Medium Business Enterprise Climate Hub. She is a director of the SME Climate Hub. Pamela works for multinational companies and governments to accelerate a global movement and develop a one-stop shop platform mobilizing small and medium-sized enterprises to take climate action on net zero. And after your keynote, I understand you'll also be interviewing Josh Whale.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And do you want to introduce him, or would you like me to do that now?
I'm happy to introduce him when he's going to be on the line, if
exactly.
that's fine with you.
Absolutely super. Thanks very much. We'll be back.
Thank you very much for having me today, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to present the work that we're doing with the SME Climate Hub. So we have a few slides to introduce this work, and I must say that it fits very well with the theme that we have today, disruptors, because we think that the hub is really an exercise in innovation and radical collaboration. So if we bring up the first slide, you will see soon enough that the hub is a joint effort of different organizations. So the Women Business Coalition, the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, the International Chamber of Commerce, the UN Race to Zero, and we're in partnership with Normative and the Net Zero team at Oxford University. So we'll be talking more about our partners in just a couple of minutes, but first things first, what is the hub really? So we designed the SME Climate Hub to act as a one-stop shop for SMEs wanting to take climate action. So in other words, this means that the hub is a platform that SMEs can go to access the tools and resources that they need to start their climate journey, make a commitment, take action, and build business resilience. Another key element is that the hub is the official pathway for SMEs to join the UN Race to Zero. And we're very proud to already have over 2,800 actually SMEs. This number has already grown over the past few days from 86 different countries who've already signed up to the hub. And we certainly hope that by expanding our ecosystem of partners in the coming months, we'll be growing this number exponentially. So in case you're still wondering why we're focusing on SMEs, then hopefully the next slide that we have for you will provide you with a few answers. First of all, SMEs make up 90% of businesses worldwide. That's 2 billion employees, not to mention the supply chains that all these businesses are part of. And we know how important Scope 3 emissions are going to be going forward. In addition to that, SMEs also happen to be among the businesses who are most vulnerable and impacted by climate change. 40 to 60% of small businesses never reopen after a disaster, and we know that these events are going to become more frequent going forward. But on top of all of this, there's a real business case, because taking climate action comes with clear benefits for SMEs. It allows them to reduce costs by improving efficiency across their business. They can also grow their brand by embedding climate into their DNA. This helps attract new customers. It also helps them access funding more easily. And last but not least, it also helps them future-proof their business, because they make the required changes before they become compulsory by law or inevitable. So with all of this in mind, we have created the Hub as a platform that provides SMEs with all that they need to really get started on climate action. So you'll see on the next slide that when SMEs go onto the Hub, they're able to make a commitment in line with the Paris Agreement. That means reaching net zero no later than 2050, halving their emissions by 2030, and reporting on their progress on an annual basis. They're also able to access a library of tools created by Oxford University. But on top of this, we're extremely excited to be launching a new series of tools this week and in the coming weeks, specifically designed and tailored for SMEs. And these include a measurement tool, a carbon calculator developed by Normative with support from Google, that will provide SMEs with insights on their industry, so the carbon emissions in their industries, looking at the average from businesses similar to theirs by country and sector. We're also developing a tailored reporting framework for SMEs in partnership with CDP, much simpler, adapted to SMEs' needs. And we're literally just about to launch an education course, Climate Fit, developed by BSR and the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, that will help SMEs really understand what climate action entails. The course covers everything from operations, finance, strategy, governance, even storytelling. And all of this is brought to life thanks to our other partners. We've been working very closely with governments, the UK government, for example, who's been driving an incredible campaign in the UK in the lead up to COP26. We literally just launched the Spanish version of the Hub with support from the Spanish government. We'll be working in other countries. We also have outreach partners such as CDP and Ceres, who are reaching out to their own networks to bring SMEs onto the platform. We have corporate partners, strategic partners that are funding, supporting, and developing, helping develop some of our work. Amazon, Intuit, Google, Verizon. And we also have a fantastic group of corporates, the 1.5 supply chain leaders, who are promoting the initiative across their supply chains. So we could keep talking about the Hub, but I think it's important to recognize that the Hub wouldn't have any impact without its SMEs. And we happen to have a number of SMEs signing up from the transport sector, and we wanted to invite one of them to join the discussion today. So we should have Josh Whale from Randon-based SME. I didn't know you would be here in person. This is a wonderful surprise. So Randon-based SME ampersand, and I believe you are deploying a fleet of electric motorcycle in East Africa. So I'm really delighted to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Pamela. It's a real honor to be here today. Oh, should I take this off?
Up to you.
All right. A bit
Great.
more natural. The silent disco is a lot of fun, though.
So I know we don't have much time today, so if that's fine with you, I suggest we dive right into the first question, which is really about your view on the role that SMEs should play within the race to zero.
I think there's a couple of roles that we can play in. Obviously, we see ourselves as a startup as well as an SME, so we're in that technology sector. We're really trying to drive innovation as in climate tech as a real core of what we do. But in doing so, we also are very conscious of our emissions impact. We also receive some grant funding, so we have to track our impact, and so we're becoming much more aware of that. And so I think as an early adopter for awareness and using some of the tools that are available, there's a Swedish company, Normative, that's developed a tool to track the carbon impact for SME businesses, making it really easy for companies like us as well. I think there's also a key role to play because some of the big corporates who we heard from earlier are doing great things, but they don't always move quickly. So like the big oil super tankers that are transporting fossil fuels around the world at the moment, they have a lot of power and they can do a lot, but they also take a long time to turn around. And so when we were starting out as a startup in Rwanda doing electric motorcycles, we always heard, some big OEM, one of the big Indian or Japanese motorcycle companies that sells all the motorbikes in East Africa, they're going to come in and just take it over. As soon as they see it's a good idea, they'll be there the next day. That just hasn't happened. In fact, we've come around to actually seeing ourselves as an energy network business, and those big motorcycle OEMs, we're actually trying to drag them in. It's quite the opposite. But at the same time, those companies can be fantastic partners. One of our investors is Total, the French energy giant, and they're opening their doors to allow us to build battery swap stations at their existing fuel stations. So those partnerships can be very helpful, and I think there's a lot that SMEs can even offer to the big kids in the room.
That's great to hear, and actually I think that's a really good segue into my next question, because we mentioned benefits earlier, and I think it's really important for SMEs to understand the business case behind climate action. So can you tell us a bit more about the benefits that you might already be seeing, or that you expect to see in the future by taking climate action through the hub and beyond?
Well, I think there's a lot now, and I'm feeling hopeful being here at COP that there is capital being mobilized towards climate innovation, towards new tools, towards the toolbox to enable companies to benefit from reducing carbon emissions, so from greater efficiency, funds for things like improving equipment, better insulation and just more up-to-date, more energy efficient transportation and vehicle options. So I think there's,
And that's definitely a great advantage. So I hope all the SMEs out there are listening to you right now. And
I think also there are, if you're raising capital, I think there are going to be new sources of capital that are directly available as well. Where there are funds specifically targeted towards climate change that we're seeing, but also the big institutional investors are promising that I think it was $170 trillion or something like that yesterday, don't quote me, was promised towards only climate friendly, or that climate compatibility would be a criteria for those investments as well.
Fantastic. And beyond this new capital, what do you think the future looks like for SMEs like yours in the transport industry? And why do you think they should be taking action through the hub, for example?
I think it's very exciting. I would certainly encourage a lot of companies. There's been a boom, of course, in electric mobility that has now really started to take off in Africa. We've raised, in this past year, we've raised about $13.5 million, including just announced yesterday from the US Development Finance Corporation. Also, there's a Swedish company, Opibus in Kenya, that's recently raised. Another bus company, Buzigo, has also raised money, just all announced in the past week. So the sector, and certainly in the global south, is still a baby, but like my baby son Luca, hi Luca, he's doubling in size like every couple of months. So it's growing. It's just taking off and growing really quickly. But for most of the people here, so far electric mobility in the global south is still, if they've even heard of it, it's maybe like a novelty aid project. It hasn't been seen as something that's actually got wings yet, but that's changing very, very rapidly. And many of us are raising money now from Silicon Valley, and the attention is turning. I would also encourage businesses, particularly looking at in the transport sector, to look at the unit economics around business to business. So we serve customers who travel 150 kilometers a day. Those are the customers who are going to benefit the most from going electric or from going to a clean transport solution, because they're the ones who are spending the most on fuel. So our customers spend more every year normally spend more in a year on fuel than they would buying a new motorcycle. But for a private consumer, that payback period, especially while you have that upfront battery cost with most vehicles, is just much, much longer.
Okay, so B2B, definitely one thing to keep
B2B.
in mind. Great. And before we wrap up, do you have one final piece of advice for SMEs looking to start their climate journey?
I think never give up. I guess I would say again, don't be afraid of the big guys. They're not that fast, and often you can help them out. But persevere. I mean, we started this journey 2014, and there were a lot of long years. We were the first electric mobility company basically in Africa, as far as we're aware. Certainly working with motorcycles, and now there are about 50 startups now working just in the East Africa region alone of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. So it's happening, and if you get on board, you'll be on the right side of history.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh, for sharing this success story. I think it's very heartening. And to that, I would add, obviously, a very final piece of advice, which is please go check out the hub, make the commitment, join our community, and we very much look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The moderator, fantastic job, well done. And it was also very interesting too. We're now going to go to a panel session on energy, but we can also include transport in that as well, because that's one of the themes for this show. First, I want to invite or introduce Erik Martinsson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Svea Solar. It's the fastest growing clean tech company in Sweden, and one of the leading solar energy companies in Europe. Mr. Martinsson, Erik, is co-founded the company in 2014 with a clear vision to liberate the world from harmful energy, and since then has expanded the business into 5 markets in Europe. Mr. Martinsson was awarded Sweden's Super Talent 2021 by Nova Talent. Joining us on the panel is Per Larssons, who is Director of Sustainability at Ragn-Sells, which is a waste management company, really trying to completely transform its business sectors and approaches into what is waste, and very much looking at it from the vantage point of the circular economy. He's an award-winning winner in communication, social sustainability, and entrepreneurship, listed multiple times by Trust Across America as one of the top thought leaders in trust. And he's currently appointed an expert for setting environmental targets for sea and coastal regions in Sweden, which presumably in terms of pollution. Come and join me, Per. Yeah. Then we also have Jonas Eklund, who is the CEO and president of Zelio. Zelio has developed a unique technology for renewable energy in recycled aluminium and supplying the energy as electricity and heat at a low cost on demand. At all hours of the day, of course. That's important too. Jonas has extensive experience of leadership in renewable technology companies with a focus on the transformation of innovation into the commercialization and global market expansion. In 2019, Jonas was awarded Mission Innovation Champion. So, these are our panelists. I hope you're excited to hear from them. And let me kick off with a question to Erik from Svea Solar. We know that electrification of our society is taking place. Today, this will lead to an increased demand for electricity in the future. And some countries like Sweden, people are already complaining, having a debate about rising energy costs. I remember a few years ago, it was the same arguments in Germany over the cost of renewable energy subsidies. and some people are worried about potential electricity shortages. Based on the situation today, what would you say that is possible for us to do in this mega transition? And do you see any specific obstacles that might slow us down? And not just in Sweden, right? We're talking about a worldwide thing with renewable energy.
So basically, I would say that there's three megatrends. We're electrifying transport, we're electrifying industries, and we're making sure that the grid is renewable, basically. And our job with working with solar is to really ensure that we are putting out our solar, our storage systems, our EV chargers as fast as we possibly can here in Sweden and elsewhere in Europe, because we are going to have a massive shift of energy and electrification now. And I would say we have the products out there. The solar is good enough, the storage are getting better and still are good enough right now. So I mean, there's a lot of things happening. But when it comes to improvements, I would rather say that we need actual improvements on the regulatory side, where it's kind of hard to get permits now to build more solar. It's hard to get permits to be efficient on trading on the frequency market, helping the grid to be more stable. So instead of saying that we need better technology, I would say we need politicians that really understand that this shift is about to happen, and by changing the regulations there, we can speed up that transition, because we have all the products we need, and it's our job and our friends in the industry to just implement what's already is there.
Let maybe come back to this question, and maybe everybody else can be involved too after Eric's just made his comment. But solar power, you're in this part of the world, which is in the Nordic region. I'm British, and I remember lots of people laughing when Newcastle University, many years, put some solar panels on their roof, and everybody said the sun doesn't shine in Newcastle. It rains either 364 days or 363 days. But is this not a myth with solar power? Can't we do things with solar power even in cold northern latitudes? Is this an important point?
I mean, I think it's interesting. If it works in Sweden, you could have the argument that it works everywhere. So, but the thing is, it does work, and it's actually not that bad. I mean, if you look at, for every kilowatt peak you put up on a roof in Sweden, you get 1,000 kilowatt hours per year. Maybe in Spain you get 1,600. So of course it's better, but the thing is, it's still good, and we have other sources to combine with. We have wind, we have hydro, and other things. So it's just a question of how much solar will you have in every country. I believe that overall, over time, you will have somewhere between 70 to 75% of all energy needs in the world will come from solar, where maybe Newcastle and Sweden will be an ironic exception, maybe only reaching 25, 30%.
I'm going to come to Jonas in a second, because he's going to talk about storage, which is a really important topic. But Per, from your perspective of a large company in that part of the world dealing with waste management, where does this nexus between, energy, transportation come in terms of decarbonizing your business?
The key thing, the most important thing, is that we make sure that we can care for the resources. And there, of course, we need to make sure that we can recycle them. And I would like to elaborate on what Stefan Håkansson from E.ON said in his speech. He said that their waste-to-energy plants will be a key component in creating circularity. And I agree with him. But also, after incineration, we will be able to sort out what's in the ashes. 20% of the fly ashes contain salts, and the most important and the most valuable ingredient there are the potassium. So suddenly, the waste-to-energy plants in the future will be the kidney and the liver in a circular economy. Why? Because when we extract the salts, we will also be able to extract the non-wanted things. They have the metals that should be stored forever, like cadmium or other arsenic as an example. So they will be kept away. And then suddenly the waste-to-energy plants will have a key component. Of course, we need to mechanically sort out what can be recycled and kept it in a higher loop. But everything can't go into material recycling. We have put in so much nasty stuff into our ecosystem, so we need to loop out the bad things. And here, where it connects.
Yeah. Maybe I can come to Jonas here, because there was a big announcement today here. I don't know if you were aware of it, but I think it was called the Long Duration renewable energy storage system. I was talking to some people at Alfa Laval who are part of it and very excited, and I think you're part of it too. Could you just tell us a little bit about what this announcement was about, and then explain a little bit how it fits into what you're doing?
But as started to reach out and get the understanding of how important the energy storage is for the transition into renewables. And in one way it can be very obvious, but it's also been some kind of neglected or even forgotten must. Because to be able to have renewable energy around the clock, you need to store it, because the nature is not reliable enough. And looking at what happened when we turned from renewables into fossil fuel, that's because fossil fuel is stored energy. And it gives you on-demand energy in the location you want to have it and at the timing you want to have it. And to have a full transition and a global total transition into renewables, we of course need to bring that back to renewables, that you can decide when and where you want to have the energy. And the key enabler for that is long duration energy storage. And that's what we formed with this council that we released today with these 25 companies, with Aselio and Alfa Laval and several others.
Very exciting. And I have a curious question, because somebody asked me this before I came on stage, which is, how long can you store a watt of renewable energy in, say, your system? How long is it there available for? And when does it disappear, or does it stay there forever?
I mean, that's not the right question.
Okay.
The question is not for how long time you can store it. The question is for how long duration you can store. So to build the system for 24 hours a day based on solar, in the sunny country, you have 6-7 hours every day with a lot of power. And then you need to store the energy and to provide power from stored energy the remaining 17-18 hours. So that's the duration of the storage system should be connected to this 17-18 hours.
Yeah.
Then, of course, if you try to build 24 hours a day, 365 days in Newcastle or in Sweden, you need something else. Then you need to store the energy for a long time, providing summer energy in the winter. That's a completely different question. But for long duration, that has been the missing piece here in the puzzle, is to, together with solar and wind, build a system that provides dispatchable on-demand energy 24 hours a day. And for doing that, you need a real long duration on 10 hours, 13 hours, 18 hours, something like that, to build such a system.
Interesting. Eric, let me come back to you. How important is what our colleague here is doing, and how important is it that we do have an initiative of many, many companies, including in engineering, on storage? How significant is it for the industry that you're in, producing green energy?
No, I would say going back to that sort of take with combining this with industry, electrification of cars and so on, it's critical. I mean, obviously we need to store the energy in batteries. We need to have other more long-term solutions, such as Aselio is providing, and other features. I mean, so really working with this ecosystem, having wind, solar, hydro, where you have the ability to have that, and combining that with different sort of solutions is key, I would say. And I mean, it's not that we don't have the solutions. I mean, like Jonas has talked about, there's different solutions out there. Now the companies need to come together and just implement everything. And that's why I mentioned in the beginning, the politicians need to understand that we need to run now. We need to go fast, and they can't stand in our way.
Per, yes, please.
Yeah, and coming back to transportation, what we are doing now in our new plant that we're setting up in Stockholm, where we're going to produce the salts out of the fly ashes, we will collect them from different waste to energy plants surrounding the Stockholm area. And of course, it will be fossil fuel. fuel. We make fossil-free fuel. We make sure that we doesn't transport and using today's technology. We use tomorrow's technology. So when you create circular system, you need to make sure that when you transport things, they need to be fossil-free. And one other example of that is our collaboration with Bring in Stockholm and in Oslo and more cities, both in Norway and Sweden, where they are transporting goods out to the customer. We as a waste management company, and we're collecting back the returns. So we're bringing the parcel out, bringing the garbage from the end customer to our hub with just 100% electric trucks. So this is changing. And the big thing here is the collaboration that Bring relies on, that we will bring their parcel out to the customer instead of, because normally you would like to meet your customer, your end customer. So the trust and collaboration will be a key factor. And that will also be the case in the energy system. Can we trust on the energy? Can we trust that we can have enough? Can we really build those systems? So therefore I think it's important what is going on at the moment. And on a personal note, I had the opportunity to this summer install solar cell energy production on my farm. So 16,000 kilowatt hours annually, they promised me in Sweden. We'll see if it works.
Yeah. I'm interested in sometimes people raise a criticism of renewables like wind power and solar. They say, you know, wind turbines require a lot of steel. Solar power at the end of its life has some heavy metals or other metals in it that could be a problem. I'd be interested to know, in terms of the circular economy, what happens to a solar panel, say from Sphere Solar, for example, and do you see in your work, you know, these products now coming into the waste stream? What is going on with them, and how can we make this circular?
What is very good that we are promised more or less 30-year warranty, a guarantee that it will last. So there's not that complicated. Maybe some parts need to be changed, but not the solar cells in itself. So we, as today's recycler, we won't see those products for many years to come. So it's not a problem now.
Right. What do you think, our colleagues in Stockholm? Eric, what is happening with the panels after the end of their life?
I mean, first of all, we need to keep in mind, for every day that solar is going on, I mean, the impact or the amount of energy being put in a new solar panel is going down somewhere between 10-15% per year, first of all. So the climate impact is going down. And when you look into a panel, it's usually silicone and glass and aluminum and so on, which is quite easily to recycle. So it's a product that can, over time, be 100% recyclable. So you can actually make a completely circular economy with solar. And I think that's super important, because if that was not the case, solar would not be the most powerful solution to sustainable living, which it is today.
Yeah.
So I think that's key.
Tell me something, Jonas. So you have a very specific product for storage. Do you look around this landscape and see other areas of storage where you say that would be interesting for, say, this part of the world? Our product is good for this part of the world. Is it regional specific, national specific? Because there are many storage ideas coming through. I'm just curious to get a more global business perspective.
Yes, our solution is especially good for decentralized installation, where you can install the long-duration energy storage solution close to the end user. And by that, you get independent from the grid. And at the same time, you can support the grid. So if the grid has problems, a distributed or decentralized approach can help the grid. Then, of course, if you don't have a grid, it's extremely important to have a distributed installation. But what we see now is that when we started to market this solution some years ago, it was mainly regions with no grid or very bad grids. Good for us, not as good for the world maybe, is that almost all grid systems today has a huge need for decentralized installations. So it's more that you need to combine different technologies and different approaches for large-scale centralized both generation and storage, and decentralized installation of both renewable generation and long-duration energy storage close to the end user. to build the landscape for a complete solution for the energy system.
Yeah. We had a session this afternoon in the Swedish pavilion with Business Sweden, and there were various companies there, and the theme was about energy efficiency. And one of the kind of threads that came through that, and I know a little bit about this from my work when I was at the United Nations, was that solar and wind are quite sexy, right? But energy efficiency is sort of slightly unseen and gets maybe overlooked in some areas, but it has a role to play in the halving of emissions by 2030, and of course in meeting the net zero in 2050. Is there a relationship between your businesses, energy efficiency, renewable energy? How do we make sure that we're deploying all the possibilities to achieve our climate targets with speed?
Yeah, I do have a very concrete example. This is our collaboration that we now started with Alfa Laval. And I think Alfa Laval was one of the keynote. They have fantastic installations to really reduce the consumption of energy. But one specific area that we will launch next year is how we will recirculate nitrogen out of wastewater. And the saving of energy to extract the nitrogen directly from the wastewater with a circular technique that produce nitrogen fertilizer is huge. So it means that the energy saving will be combined with resource recovery, and at the same time we can avoid emission of laughing gas emissions. So it's a double free win here.
Yes, and laughing gas being one of those sort of forgotten emissions in that sort of annex at the back of the Kyoto Protocol.
Yeah, but the secret number is 287 here.
Yeah.
How many times the carbon dioxide emissions that laughing gas has?
Yeah. Gentlemen, maybe this is not relevant to your way of thinking about how things go, but is energy efficiency, I mean, if somebody saves energy, can they store it with you, Jonas? Or is that not possible? And what about combining energy efficiency and renewables? Is that a powerful ally together?
Well, the challenge here to make the transition from fossil to renewables is really a vast challenge, and all technologies and all processes that can help the transition is really needed. So we are changing the whole global energy system, and to do that we need a lot of different solutions. So energy efficiency is of course extremely important in that, but also the electrification. You talked about electrical cars before. That's also a transition from fossil to electricity as an energy carrier, and that electricity needs to come from somewhere. Renewables, of course, and you need to have it available 24 hours a day, so you need long duration storage as well. And you need to be efficient, so energy efficiency as well.
Okay, last question, big picture question. What will the world look like to you in 2050? Each one of you, short answer. What will it look like?
By creating a circular economy, we'll be able to then reduce our carbon emissions, so we will fulfill the 1.3 degree ambition. That is my answer.
Yep. Guys?
I think that putting a target that far ahead is too far. We're going to run as fast as we can, and if we can make it faster than 2050 or 2040 or whatever we're going to do, we're going to do it faster. So my job is basically to run as fast as we can, and if we can get there faster, we're going to get there, but hopefully we have reached that target a long time ago when we are there.
Right. Jonas?
Yes, and of course we need a total transition into renewable energy. But as I said, the challenge is vast, and looking at long duration energy storage, we need 1 terawatt hour just to be on the momentum for net zero until 2025. And so far we have only built 7% of what we need to build until 2025. So it's a challenge, and it's also a huge market.
I suppose maybe I'm going to be cheeky and ask a last question. You know, we don't have time in supporting the UN Development Programme with a campaign on fossil fuel subsidies. We all know this has been debated for donkey's years with the G20, with the G7, G8, discussing phase out of fossil fuel subsidies, blah, 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 and yet it doesn't really seem to happen with any speed. Would that be helpful for all your business models if there was a phase out of the fossil fuel subsidies and a proper price on carbon, etc.?
Yes, we need to have the right price on carbon.
Yep. Guys?
Yeah, I think that getting a price point where everyone is paying for their own garbage would be quite a sort of level playing field that I think everyone would appreciate.
Yeah.
But even without that, we're going to reach our goals. The question is just the timing. So the question now, as mentioned before, is are the politicians going to give us a level playing field and we're going to run fast, or are we going to just make a nice jog to the finish line?
Super. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Per, for being here in Glasgow, and to our colleagues here in Stockholm. Jonas, you're in Stockholm as well, are you?
No, I'm outside Stockholm.
I was going to say, it looks very much like outside Stockholm, but we won't ask where. But listen, thanks very much for being on our panel. It was a great conversation, and we'll move on to the next section. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right. Oh, there's people clapping. That's even at this late hour. Okay, we're now going to... Oh, right. We need to go to the Stockholm hub. Okay, let's go to Stockholm. Hello, Stockholm. Are you there? Hello, Stockholm. Are you with us? No, we can't raise them. I was told that...
Yes, we're here.
Oh, they're
yes,
here.
I'm here.
Fantastic.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Nick.
It so feels like the European Song Contest, this, when it's like, let's go to Stockholm and get their vote.
Yes.
How did you feel about the last session? Was it a 6, a 7? Are they going to win?
I think it's, I want that, not the jog, I want the rush into the future.
Thanks.
And the long duration storage. I mean, those two things, I like those.
Yeah.
And then I have a summer house with no electricity and no grid, so I want that solution as well.
Yeah.
Without grid.
Yeah. Thank you. And what about Nairobi? It's so late for you guys in East Africa right now. Anybody from Nairobi with us to check in? Hi, guys.
Hi, Nick. Yes, we had a very interesting evening. We've enjoyed the talks. We had very good panelists. And the conversation around transport and energy is quite something that is very close to the heart of Kenyans. And particularly because in the recent months, we've had very high cost of fuel. And that means that transport is becoming quite untenable. So if we are able to find solutions that are sustainable and affordable, we are very excited to see if we'll be able to move forward. Unfortunately, we didn't have our panelists having a conversation on the main broadcast, but we hosted Kamau Wawero, who is working with OPS Bus, which is actually a Swedish startup company based in Nairobi. And they are converting the combustion vehicles with combustion engines into and replacing them with electric engines. And what is exciting, they're doing this even for heavy vehicles, the 4x4 that are used by tourists. So that is as part of the aim to transition even tourism towards a green economy. So it's been an exciting moment. It's quite late for us here. Part of our audience have started to leave, but it has been very excited and we're very much engaged even on Twitter. And we're looking forward even for the forthcoming conversations in the coming days. Thank you very much, Nick, and everybody.
Thank you very much, Nairobi. And I just want to say one thing, because one of the questions that came from one of your guests there was about the United Nations Environment Programme, and saying that basically the people at the UNEP drive around in big gas-guzzling cars. That's very true. But I think without the United Nations Environment Programme in Kenya, you would not have this massive growth of renewable energy from the Rift Valley in terms of geothermal. UNEP played a big part in developing that and getting it underway for Kenya, and also the world's largest wind farm in sub-Saharan Africa at Lake Turkana. So, yeah, UNEP is actually probably a great blessing to Kenya rather than it being a problem with some of the cars. And that needs to change. You're quite right.
Very, very true.
Yeah. Right, I think we've got a video here right now from Matthias Goldman, 5 top coalitions. Let's roll that video if we can do that.
Now the way the COP works is that everybody has to agree. Every country has a veto, and this is the 26th time we're negotiating roughly the same issues. So sometimes you will feel that it's moving way too slow, not enough is happening. And that's when it makes sense to look just around the corner and see what the coalitions of the willing are doing, the different initiatives that are going to come out of the COP, not formally part of the COP, but related to the COP and very relevant for the work that you and I do. Here are my top 5 that I believe that we should keep a close look on. First of all, the Global Coal to Clean Power Coalition. It has been pushed hard by the United Kingdom Secretary and Chairmanship, and it's going to be a big thing. Secondly, the joint statement for accelerating the transition to zero-emission vehicles, often the electric vehicles, are the sort of image of moving to a sustainable future. Well, this agreement is also going to be highly relevant for us. Thirdly, the Glasgow leaders on forest and land use, very interesting for a forest country like Sweden, where I'm from, but land use is a global issue and something that we need to tackle better. Fourthly, leading up to the COP, we remember that the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, said that fossil fuels are subsidized to the tune of $11 million a minute. So I expect us to see movement forward to reduce subsidies, to find friends of fossil fuel subsidy reform to move forward and have new proposals for us. And fifthly, we've already seen the methane pledge. Some countries have already joined, philanthropists have joined, companies have joined. I expect this also to be big. And that is my number 1 to 5 until now. I also expect there to be surprises that we don't know of yet. Keep your eyes and ears open. When negotiations are slow, the coalition of the willing will deliver.
Great. Thanks a lot, Matthias, for being on with these great messages, which you're doing almost every day. It's really fantastic. So that's the end of Disruptors. We're now coming to behavioral change. That's important too. Changing human mindsets and habits with tools like policy, communication. That's part of the picture. I'd also put into that education as well, in schools, in every country of the world. We want to meet some experts and doers on incorporating the transformation of how we think, we speak, and we act in this final segment here. And we'd like to roll a little video right now to explain behavioral change through this particular lens. So I'll do these people and then... Great. And before I introduce the wonderful panelists we've got here, I'd like to invite back to the stage Ingmar Rentzhog, the founder and CEO of We Don't Have Time. We've been through an interesting journey today with all kinds of things, and now we're at behavioral change. I wonder what that means for transport and energy. I wonder what it means for how people move around. You know, that is a behavioral change too. People got so wedded to their cars, right? They'll sit in a traffic jam, listening to Radio 3 or whatever, thinking that's better than getting the bus.
I think they have the answer. I mean, if we're going to fix the transportation, we need to change behavior. We can't just electrify all cars.
Yeah.
We also need to change how much we use car, when we use car, and how we transport ourselves.
Yeah.
And we have had this corona pandemic, and I think that changed everyone's behavior. And behavioral science, once you have changed someone's behavior, it's very hard to get back if you're getting used to it.
Yeah.
And I could go to myself, for example. When I moved outside the center of Stockholm to a little bit in a house in the suburb, I was really keen on finding a short distance to the subway. So I live 200 meters from the subway. Do you know how many times I've traveled by subway to work last year?
I don't know.
2.
Okay.
I don't do that anymore because I found out that bicycle is much more efficient. I don't get disease, and it's much more freedom, and it's totally possible to do it year around.
Yeah.
Bicycle is the most efficient transportation in a city. But we need leaders that build the cities in a way you're not getting killed when you...
Exactly, because you're very right, because I lived in Nairobi for 13 years, and I took my bike with me from Britain when I got my job in Nairobi with UNEP, and I was determined to get to the office by bicycle.
Yeah.
What I learned very quickly was not to bicycle, but was to actually fall off the bicycle into the nearest ditch. Because these things, matatus, these minibuses, would come down the road and just go right to the very edge of the road just to kind of get past each other. And if you were a cyclist, you were almost dead within seconds. So it's absolutely critical that the joys we have, and I can tell you when I came back from UNEP and came to Bonn in Germany, it was like paradise. I could cycle along the Rhine, cycle everywhere. It was joy. And the people there didn't realize how lucky they were in Bonn. But we need to make that normal for people in developing countries too.
Yes,
yeah.
we need. And that's why it's so important that they don't make the same mistake as us.
Exactly, exactly.
Build roads for bicycles instead of big cars.
Yeah.
It's much more value for everyone.
Yeah.
But I have another example, energy.
Okay. Yeah.
We also need to change behavior regarding energy. And I think it's more of a mind shift we need there. Instead of being a consumer of energy, everyone could be a producer of energy now.
Yeah.
We had Svea Solar on the show. Actually, they have installed solar panel on my own roof. And my electric bill gives me back more money when I consume.
That's fantastic.
And that's fantastic, but there's also another thing. I've changed the behavior on how I consume electricity.
Yep.
Because I wasn't aware about how electricity affects. So now I don't use the boiler anymore because it's too much electricity in the short time period, so it's better to use electricity more in a longer time period, etc. I've changed behavior because in my mindset, I'm a producer. I don't want to, I avoid buying other electricity. I want to use my own.
Yes.
And hopefully I'll also want to sell what
exactly.
I don't use.
Exactly. Which sounds like a wonderful solution when you compare it with we won't say where this house is that we're staying in Glasgow, but somebody has never heard of windproofing because there's a gale of wind coming under the door every night and through the windows, and so the boiler is going almost all day, just trying to keep a temperature that makes the penguins happy.
Yeah.
It's really unbelievable, and this is in a G7 country, right? It's really incredible.
So it's easy to change behavior, and it's fun.
Yeah.
And you also save a lot of money.
Yes,
actually,
exactly.
I make a profit out of producing energy.
Yes.
I make a profit of not using the subway because it costs nothing to use the bicycle.
Exactly.
So that's great. And once more, if we just turn off that counter of the fossil fuel subsidies, it will be even more profitable to do this.
And this would all move a lot
Everyone
faster.
will do it.
Yeah,
Everyone
the transformation would be much faster.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
You don't need to turn it off. It was just me.
No, don't turn it off. We'd like it back on.
We need it. We need
it. Yeah. You just turned off the fossil fuel subsidies. That was great. I wish it was so easy. Okay. We're now going to move on to our panelists for this area of behavioral change. I'm wondering whether we can get Carly Gilbert-Patrick from the UN Environment Programme in Nairobi. We know there were power cuts today. Oh my God. Are you actually coming through by candle or candle power, or? I'm going to have to put my headphones on actually.
I have my iPhone torch as light.
Okay.
And I'm hotspotting off my data.
Wow, okay. So
it is 11 p.m. here, but I promise I'm not in a nightclub.
Okay, right. Well, we know that because the music was it wasn't very good music. That's right. We couldn't even hear it. Okay, so Carly is a sustainable mobility expert with over 20 years of experience. Key areas of expertise include strategic planning, program and project management, public speaking, stakeholder mobilization, and engagement. That's probably pretty much everything, yeah? Technical areas of expertise include mobility and digitalization, mass rapid transport, public bike share, active mobility, walking and cycling, congestion charging, and low emission zones. Yeah? So, I mean, you're covering the whole gamut, but I think the most exciting thing about all this is really, in a sense, your work in East Africa and other developing countries on trying to bring some of the issues forward that we were just talking about, how you can actually, in a civilized way, bicycle without being killed by a Matatu minibus, and the air pollution that's associated with the congestion there. Before I go to you, I'm also going to introduce our next guest, Solitaire Townsend Chief. Or is it Solitaire Townsend? There should be a comma after Townsend, because I've got you as Solitaire Townsend Chief. I thought you were from an indigenous tribe. Please, come and join us here. Solitaire Townsend, she's Chief Solutionist. That's an interesting word, isn't it? And co-founder of Futera. And Solitaire advises governments, charities and brands on making sustainability so desirable it becomes the normal. That's absolutely the way it has to be. It's possible to watch her TED Talks and read her in The Guardian, Huffington Post, many, many others, and more often as @GreenSolitaire. Solitaire was named Ethical Entrepreneur of the Year in 2008, and more recently was chair of the UK Green Energy Scheme, a member of the United Nations Sustainable Lifestyles Task Force, and the London Leader for Sustainability. Her new book, we like to plug books, we're very happy one day I'll write one and then I'd like somebody to plug it. Her new book, The Happy Hero, How to Change Your Life by Changing the World, is out now. And Christmas is just around the corner, let's not forget that. And then we also have Jaber Sivak, hope I haven't mangled that too badly, CEO of Kebira Mobility. Jaber is an entrepreneur working on environmentally friendly projects. He's the CEO and one of the founders of Kebira Mobility, an electric vehicle startup transforming the existing transportation system. He is an Indian Navy veteran, having served as an aeronautical engineer, and post-retirement from the Indian Navy, he started his entrepreneurial journey towards handling projects that make a positive impact on the environment. So let's first go over. Oh, there's somebody else, is there? He'll be later. Okay, let's first then go to Carly in Nairobi. Carly, give us a little keynote speech about what you're up to.
Okay, well, what are we not up to? So we at UNEP, we are pretty clear that we are in the midst of a triple planetary crisis, and we need to do something very different real quick to deal with all the issues that are being faced. And we're seeing it in the health, we're seeing it in climate, we're seeing it with COVID, the planet. What can we do differently? And we're focusing in on decoupling increased emissions from increased mobility, because the consumption patterns right now are not sustainable. So we have projects supporting countries transitioning to electric. We are working on supporting walking and cycling projects, getting governments to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists in a way that we've always traditionally prioritized cars. And we're working on clean fuels and vehicles. And we've also more recently started looking at the role of digitalization in transport. So yeah, that's what we're up to right now.
Okay, fantastic. Over to you, Solitaire. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your work and how you think it's creating behavioural change.
Thank you so much. And for the last 20 years, I've been working on behaviour change. And just today, we've launched a new survey at Futerra in partnership with Ipsos, the global market research company, to really look into, does the world still believe we can solve climate change? And this was in 27 countries and over 20,000 people. And the first thing we discovered is that 73% of people really care about climate change, and well over 50% of people say they care more than they did. But let's get down to, do they still think we can win? And actually, well over half of people are feeling that perhaps we might be able to solve climate change. But 11% of people, 11% of our fellow human beings across those 27 countries have given up. They're now what we call fatalists. They no longer think anything can be done about climate change. And they're more likely to live in the global south, or wherever they are in the world, they're more likely to have access to a lower income and a lower education. But the number one criteria, the number one finding we had around who these fatalists are, is that they're young. In fact, 1 in 5 young people are now fatalistic around the world about what we can do about climate change. And I am more afraid of fatalism than I am of climate change, because climate change is just chemistry. Fatalism is humanity, and we're the ones who have to make a difference. What could we do about this fatalism? Like, if fatalism is fatal, how do you cure it? So number one, we need to flip the script. Now that's actually a new UN campaign around flipping the script, becoming answer activists, moving from the problem agenda, which is real and true and justified by science, and which we understand very well now is what's going on in our hopefully 1.9 degrees warming that we've agreed so far at COP. And we need to move to a solutions agenda.
absolutely telling the story, because over 60% of people worldwide are saying they're hearing far more about the problem and they're not hearing about any solution. Secondly, we've got to sell the benefits. We were just hearing a moment ago how cycling can improve your health, it can improve air quality, it can give you better sleep, how renewable energy can build resilience into countries, particularly those which are still developing. And then the third thing I'd say is, when you're trying to do behaviour change, the number one thing that people forget is to ask for what you want. We give the big story about why you should care. We talk very much about how we need to go about changing our systems, but we don't say what we need you to do. And that's why a few years ago, we worked with the UN to translate the Sustainable Development Goals into Good Life Goals. And these are a set of actions. If you Google Good Life Goals, you'll find them. These are a set of actions that every individual in the world can take, and we know that if you do these actions, you are contributing to a sustainable world. And they're everything from eating differently to traveling differently, but they're also on teaching your children around what they can do about climate change. And of course, believing that tomorrow can be better than today.
Yeah. Carly, I know we've talked about behavioural change, and in fact, there's also behavioural change that has to occur in governments, isn't there? I mean, in some of the global south, it's not that, it's not rocket science to put bicycle lanes in that are safe, but a lot of governments don't do it, do they? Because it's almost like, I don't know, some seem to be proud to have lots of cars on the road, even though it's a nightmare. I mean, you're in Nairobi. When I worked in Nairobi, I'd set off in 2001 to the airport, Jomo Kenyatta. You could do it in 15 minutes. Now, how long does it take? 3 hours? 4 hours? So how is it? How is it that the behavior in terms of the development path of the developing countries has kind of mirrored the developed ones, and then the developed ones had to go back to kind of relearn what a better development path was?
Yeah, I think it's human nature to get things really wrong before you realize how bad it is, and like you said, flip the script and do things differently. And cars have for hundreds of years been a symbol of success in the global south. And it's only when we look at Nairobi now, when we look at Addis Ababa, when we look at Kigali, now in the last 3 to 4 years, Nairobi's ring-fenced 20% of its transport budget for walking and cycling. Things are changing, but it's once traffic has come to a standstill. But now we're seeing this big change. But it's, we keep talking about cultural change and human infrastructure, but the first thing we say to government you have to do is build it. It's all well and good having car-free days and saying how amazing it is to cycle, how healthy it is, but if you're not providing basic safe infrastructure for people to walk and cycle, it's really hard to change culture if you're not putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
So we're really focusing on that at the moment.
The surveys you've been involved in, were they predominantly in developed countries rather than the global south? No, tell us.
So across the 27 countries, South Africa, Brazil, China, India, and what we find when we look around the world and the behaviour change that we've done with the Good Life Goals is that often we focus on over-consumers. And of course, there's over-consumers in every country around the world. There are those who are driven by status. In places in India, there'll be water fountains, even when the water only turns on for 2 hours a day, because wastefulness is a status symbol. And I think that's just what we were discussing around cars in Nairobi, is that status symbols are a huge part of what we're doing, of what we're talking about here, and changing those status symbols so that you can virtue signal and status signal from sustainable behaviours is a really good thing. But many environmentalists become uncomfortable with that because they think we shouldn't care about status in the first place. I tend to go with the flow of human nature and go, if we can flip that script to status symbols, being around, being healthy, being mobile, drinking water, eating more plants, and travelling by bicycle as being high status, rather than being unhealthy and sitting in your car, then we'll have won.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because I think this is sometimes one of the most neglected parts of the Paris Climate Agreement, and one of the most neglected parts of the original treaty of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, because in their wisdom, those governments that set up the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change at the Rio Earth Summit, including the former, is it George Bush? I think John Major was the British Prime Minister. Anyway, long time ago, they actually put in one of the articles of the treaty the need for climate education. And this was reaffirmed in the Paris Agreement under something called Article 12. And yet, if you ask any child in a rich country or a poor country, did they learn anything about climate change? Some may say we got a bit in the science lesson. Or there may have been a passionate teacher who wanted to go further. But the developed countries are certainly, from the research I've seen, living a slightly delusional idea that they're actually educating the children for this enormously different future they're going to face. And also the opportunities that might come from a decarbonization of the global economy in terms of new ways of living, right? It could be exciting, but it's not there. Do you think this is a failure of the governments to actually grasp this as a major tool to get people to think about behavior differently and realize that we're in a big emergency and we must move forward? Who would like to go first?
I think it's more of an opportunity than a failure. I think there's a huge opportunity, and we're actually seeing it in some more of the alternative schools. I can only talk personally in Kenya, but you look at some of the more alternative schools now, and climate and protecting the environment and the planet are being integrated throughout the curriculum, but it's on a very small scale. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a huge opportunity to integrate climate better into mainstream education. But I think there's a bigger question around education, how we teach our children, and actually just teaching our children that this is the situation with the climate and these are the solutions also isn't the answer. We need to give them the skills to manage a planet in 50 years and 100 years, and we don't know what that's going to look like. We're going to have to leave it to them. So we need to give them those core skills so they can deal with whatever the future brings.
And I would agree, and I would say that actually young people across the world are educating themselves.
Yeah.
Actually, we keep having all these campaigns to try to engage the youth in climate change. The youth is there. Actually, I want to run a campaign to educate the over 50s on climate change. We don't need to educate the under 35s.
I'm over 50.
Yeah, and you're already there. But what again, what this survey is finding and what we find with our work is that people are calling out for what they can do. What are the answers? What are the solutions? And what we don't need is a slow educational process trying to catch up with that and teaching the chemistry of climate change without teaching the culture of climate change. We have to get that story of the solutions out. And that's not just in formal education. That's also in social media. That's also in Hollywood. That's in Bollywood. That's across the world in our storytelling media. They can do a significant part of the heavy lift. And here at COP, we've had a number of, from the BBC and others, make commitments to increase their coverage of the answers, not just doing documentaries about the problem.
Yeah, that's good because, I mean, you know, it's so easy to now just focus on where it's a disaster. I mean, we're living it. We're living through the impacts now that some of us who've been in this game for a long time saw as possible things on the radar. What I would say to you about the climate education story is that, you know, children come out of school every year. And it strikes me as being unbelievable that they have such little information. And it's great that the young people are rising up to teach themselves because of the vacuum left by their national governments to actually put in the national curriculum. And I'll give you one last funny thing. I talked to a really old friend of mine called Tony Juniper, who is head of Natural England, which is the government's advisory body in England on nature-based things. And he was head of Friends of the Earth, one of the big green groups in England, in the 1990s. And I said to him, why didn't you campaign for climate education? He said, well, all the green groups looked at it and they went, it's a great idea, let's do it. And then they all went, no, it takes too long. He said that was in 1993. So we have to start somewhere, you know, I think. But it's a very good point. Okay, if you actually had a seat at the plenary right now in this COP, and you could talk directly to the COP president, the UK minister, or you could talk to any of the governments here, what would be your number one ask? Carly?
My number one ask would be not to toe the party line, but be brave and to make brave decisions that are going to get us out of the mess that we're in.
Okay.
I think that was a fantastic answer, and I absolutely second it. And I would say we desperately need someone to step out, be a hero, and do the dangerous, exciting thing, and we will all applaud. You only get one life, and this is the opportunity to change millions and billions of others.
Thanks very much, everybody. Carly, get to bed now. It looks so dark in Nairobi. I mean, it's so inky is the screen. And you must be in a room because I know there are beautiful, beautiful stars in Kenya if you were outside right now. But, you know, thanks so much for staying up so late. It's lovely to have you with us. And
Thanks for having me.
No, brilliant, yeah. And thank you so much for being with us as well. Very inspiring, both of you. And we look forward to, what is it again? What have we got to follow on Twitter?
The Solution Survey.
The Solution Survey. Okay. Okay, and at Green Solitaire?
At Green Solitaire.
There we go. All right.
Thank you so very much.
Super. Thank you very much indeed. We'll just get to the end of the show, actually. But come on. Maybe we can take... Carly's gone, but... Solitaire, come back on the stage.
Okay.
Here you go. You can ask one question. This is very unusual for this show, to have a member of the audience ask a question, but let's just do it.
Hello. Questions are great.
Say who you are and where you're from.
Sorry. My name is Bahar Özay. I'm coming from Istanbul, Turkey. And we're talking about behavioral change and for the education for our kids in our schools. We are a developing country, but we're doing in the curricula. But I see the developed countries also are not so successful about this, that we're talking about all this show going on right now. My question is, what should be the behavioral change for these companies, transnational companies that are responsible for these emissions? So not only for the kids, not only for the parents, not only for the human being as us, ordinary citizens, the paradigm shift should be on the minds of the fossil fuel companies. What should be the behavioral change for them?
We've got it.
It's actually a perfect question because we're here talking about behavior change because it's an important part of the package. You have people power, which comes from behavior change, and then you have powerful people, which is where you have the decisions made by government leaders and by business leaders. And often people decide that people power is most important. We can do this from the bottom up through demand, through changing what we do in our own lives, from voting differently. Or sometimes people think we can only do this from the top down, through the powerful people. I believe it's both. You need to put both together. I think it was Plato who said, he who rules public opinion rules the world. So we've got to change our behaviours, what we do, what we ask for, not just what we buy, but how we travel and how we vote and what we ask of our leaders. But we also have to change the leaders themselves.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is the behavioural ask of the leaders here is the same as it is for any human being, which is to be brave. Be that as an individual, we need to be brave and ask and say and do different things than we've been doing. And as business leaders, particularly, they need to be brave. And I would say, in my experience of 20 years, sometimes the individual people I meet around the world, particularly the children, are often braver than the leaders and the decisions that they take. So I hope that perhaps the people power could inspire the powerful people to do what's needed. Otherwise, overall, over the whole arc of human history, people power tends to win.
I'll just say one last thing in response to what you asked, which is that I think there is enough evidence of enough companies now who see it in their own business interest to make this transition. And those old industries that are still fighting like mad and holding on, they really are on borrowed time. And I think that you can see from the investments now happening in the world that if you invested in fossil fuel companies in the last, say, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you're getting almost not a zero rate of return. Those who've invested in renewables are getting 15%, something like that, on their money. So even the markets are now starting to say that the fossil fuel industry is on its last legs. So let's watch this space. Maybe behavior comes in different ways, or behavior change. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Now we will go to our friend in India, who is an Indian Navy veteran who I introduced earlier, who's an entrepreneur working on environmentally friendly projects. And he's the CEO and one of the founders of Kabira Mobility, an electric vehicle startup. So, Jabir, Are you with us? Maybe not. We lost him last time. We've lost him again. Oh dear. No, that's Sveta in the United States. Do you know what? I'd really like to go to Washington right now. Because you've got somebody there, have you, Sveta? Or you're doing something different, I think, to what we're doing here in Glasgow. Is that correct? Have we interrupted your feed?
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Nick.
Okay. Have we interrupted?
We actually have a guest from our audience. And I'm really thrilled to introduce Dan Lotus, who is the head of comms for Zeta. And we're talking about energy and transportation, so this couldn't be more relevant. So I'd love for Dan to introduce Zeta and then to ask a question, really to throw something out as food for thought.
Okay, so we just got lucky. We just got lucky, Sveta. We just got lucky.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great to be here with everyone. My name is Dan Zotos. I am with the Zero Emission Transportation Association here in Washington, D.C. Obviously an exciting time for everyone right now. So happy to be talking about transportation. Transportation accounts for 29% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. We have been laser focused on trying to advance robust consumer incentives for the entire populace in the United States. And frankly, we're at a critical moment here in Washington, D.C. ahead of crucial votes on public policy. I think there's some really interesting facts and stats thrown out there earlier in terms of what drives adoption. I think it's really both. It's public opinion, but it's also public policy leading the way. I guess my question for everyone in this forum would be, what can the United States learn from European countries with these really vast adoption rates?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, every country's got their own story, right? I mean, if you're talking about zero emission transportation, but I mean, Norway has, I think, the highest density of electric vehicles because they have, hydropower, which is there, which is really important. Everybody else has got their different story. But I mean, I think target setting seems to have been a big impact on this zero emission transport story. But you have the additional problems in America, of course, of often quite sprawled out cities. And, we're a bit luckier in Europe in having not so sprawled out cities. So that's one of the big challenges. But Sveta, let me ask you, did we come in at a wrong time? Were you doing something else with this fantastic guest?
No, you did not come in at the wrong time at all. We're really happy to have Dan here, part of this DC hub.
Yeah.
And we can bring him back too, so we can chat about this some more. But it was not, there couldn't be a better theme on energy and transportation to not then talk about Zeta and what's happening here. And of course, right now is still a momentous moment in United States history in terms of climate investment. We're still looking to see the passage of a $555 billion act that would really see clean energy brought to the United States and that would really support American families here in Washington, D.C. and throughout the entire country. So it's a really exciting time to be in Washington. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just great to be here. Happy to participate. And, the point on targets are important. The Zero Emission Transportation Association, our goal is 100% electric vehicle sales by 2030. We know it's ambitious and bold, but we are confident we will get there. Appreciate being here. Happy to continue the conversation as well. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up here because we have to go to India, where we're speaking to a gentleman, a retired Navy veteran who is running an entrepreneurial company with electric vehicle startup. But I would say we're all going to be listening out for what happens in DC. It's really important, as you say. And I also think that when it comes to zero emission vehicles in the States, I had the pleasure of going in an electric car journey from San Francisco to New York in 2018. And it's amazing how many charging points are being laid out. Great, thank you very much. So Jabba Siwak, maybe I pronounced that very badly, I do apologize, but we're so pleased we finally made that connection. I think it's been a bit up and down. Tell us in 5 minutes, what are you doing in India? What is happening with your startup?
Hi, Mr. Adam. Good evening, everyone. It is nice to join with you and be part of the main programs. Let me tell you, myself, Javier Schwartz, and I'm the CEO of Kavira Mobility, which is an electrical vehicle startup based out at Goa, India, and it's basically working towards segment-based solutions, providing electrical mobility on segment-based solutions. That is what the main program, what we are working around. And we have got, I'll just share some more detail about the we have a college-based student segment, daily commuters, and bike segment, and like delivery segments. Our vision is to provide accessible and affordable segment-based mobility solution in India. So let me, this is enough about the Kabira mobility, but I can tell you the biggest impact that EV will have is on pollution, which I can say here more about it. Today, the transportation sector, as we know, is the biggest responsible for pollution damage. That is around 48% in worldwide damage, or the pollution impact is created by the air pollution created by the transportation system. And out of the 48, around 60% is done basically by the personal mobility, like car, taxi, bikes, and everything. Similar thing, we have got around urgently, if you see the air quality in worldwide is 90%, city do not qualify for minimum air quality index. So that is the biggest impact in air pollution, what the transportation sector has impacted. Further to this is the sound pollution, which is around 53% of the worldwide, which is the biggest impact on sound pollutions created by the transportation segments. So this clearly indicates the transportation segment is responsible for air qualities, pollution impact, and sound pollution impacts. So we need to address this, both the impact worldwide, what we are having today, is by adopting electrical mobilities, we can find the better solutions. That is what we look upon. So if anywhere in India, like we can see the Indian government is trying hard to implement the electrical mobility, and we at Kabira Mobility have given the segment-based solutions, which is a tremendous change if the government of India puts some measures which can allow everyone to use the eco-friendly system, which can create a light solutions, which is daily use, like last mile connectivities, or the college segments, or the delivery segments. Like if by electrical vehicle EV is implemented or adopted by the thing, then by 2030 we can expect a 35% decrease in air pollution and around 60% in sound pollution. We can get a sizable impact onto our daily lives. Another impact of EV is personal mobility, we can see. That is what we are using today is traveling to college, traveling to duty places, or presently we are using mostly fossil fuel based things. So which can be reduced to personal mobility, like due to COVID in 2020, we could see the people were not able to travel in masses, and slowly the new concept traveling on the personal mobility is more important here. And that can make a better impact to the daily travel systems and all. Like pandemic, we can see it was difficult in mass transit.
Yes.
And cannot be affordable to everyone. Like a car is not possible to everyone, so it was forced to adopt some daily better or electrical based mobility solutions, sort of thing.
Jabba, I'm going to have to hurry things a little bit here because we're getting close to the end of our broadcast. But let me ask you, you're a startup, it's Kabira Mobility.
Yes.
Are you manufacturing the electric vehicles? Do you have enough renewable energy to keep them all electrified? What are those challenges you have?
Yes. We are a electrical vehicle startup. We at Kabira Mobility manufacture a different type of electrical vehicles. And yes, we are facing a lot of challenges worldwide. Is a new industry, and supply chain is the bigger challenge to everyone in the world. So we are also facing small issues like everyday changing technology, supply chain management, like many things, dependability of different countries like cells and all. So remaining all things are getting slowly implemented. We have basically answered the 2-3 big segments, which is more responsible for the climate change or the zero emissions towards zero emissions, like achieving the best impact on the climate change.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have, I mean, we know that India has done a lot since the Paris Agreement of 2015 on solar power.
Right.
Is Goa quite rich in renewable energy, or could it be?
Right. India entirely, I can say, they are trying to move towards solar powers and all. Goa, if I can say, yes, they are renewable energy is around, I do not know exact amount, but it is around 25% should be, and growing every day.
Right. Well, this is very exciting indeed, Jabba. And we had a session on before, I don't know if you saw it, where people were talking about the whole energy storage story, Swedish companies and others working on that. I think, the growth of renewable energy in Goa and storage coming soon should really help with your business, yeah?
Yes. I think that should make a bigger change. I'm not aware about that project which you mentioned, but it is going on. And our entire plants have the renewable energy sources. We are using all solar-based. Our plants are working on the solar-based power solutions. So we don't depend outside most of the thing. But the charging station, if you implement, that can change huge. And we are already on that project. We are working very fast.
Right.
And adaptability should be done very soon, by 2025 or so.
Right. Well, look, please keep in touch with We Don't Have Time. We were very delighted to have you on the show. And we'd be very happy if you want to write to us to give you as much information as we're getting at the COP26 on some of these areas to do with, new solutions, storage, and all kinds of stuff, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
There are a lot of information that will be keep imparting on the platform.
Yeah. Thank you so much indeed, Jabba, and thank you so much for staying up so late. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Adam. Bye-bye.
Well, we're coming to the end of the show, people crying in the audience that we're finishing. I mean, it's there's not a dry eye in the house. Come on, Ingmar, come and join us again. What did you take away from the show? What was the big headline takeaways?
Big headline for me is that we energy and transport is two huge areas.
Yeah.
That is quite easy to solve our challenge. And it's also the area where if you're an investor and have some brain, it's a no-brainer to invest in storage, energy storage. It's going to be a huge market because we need to store the renewable energy. And it's so many new solutions on how to do it. So that's going to be a boom market. And regarding transport, that is actually the sector where my opinion is moving fastest. I mean, the whole car industry is being electrified, and it's happening much faster than most people have predicted. We still have a little bit slower in shipping and airlines, etc. But it's going to happen there too. But of course, it's not fast enough.
Yeah.
But the most positive takeaway was actually the International Energy Agency.
Yeah.
That they crashed the numbers of all pledges we have here today, and they come up with this prognosis that we're going to hit no more than 1.8 degrees warming.
Yeah, that's
and
really.
That's actually
that was something.
That's below 2 degrees.
Yeah.
It's still higher than 1.5, but if you're at 1.8, you will have 1.5 in reach.
Yes.
But when again, it's pledges. And it's not so hard to pledge that you should need stop smoking or anything else on the New Year's party. I mean, COP is a little bit like a New Year's party for the climate.
Yes.
But it's a day after COP, and those pledges needs to become action.
Yeah.
And we're so off track of that. I mean, we're still sponsoring fossil fuel industry.
Exactly. Where are we now?
We're at $71 billion in fossil fuel subsidies since the start of the COP meeting. I remember we were in Monday. It was 20 billion.
Yeah, it was 20.
This is crazy. It's crazy stuff. One of the topic in this climate meeting is the climate fund. The rich countries are going to pay poorer countries for them to transition.
Yep.
And they seems to be impossible to agree on who is going to pay 100 billion. But 100 billion, we're going to pass that. They on the same time they're discussing this subject, they are paying the fossil fuel industry more on the same time as they are discussing it. This is the emperor naked. We can have COPs till the end of humanity. But if we don't end the sponsoring of the industry, we need to shut down. We will not achieve anything at all.
Yep. Or at the very, very worst, or the very least, it's going to slow us down incredibly.
Yeah, but it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
But hey, we don't have time.
Yes, exactly.
So we don't have time to wait for it.
Yeah.
That's why we need to end it sooner.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to end it today. And I think that Mats Pelbeck-Sharp from Ericsson, he put it so well yesterday, because it's kind of easy to get very negative when you see those numbers ticking up and ticking up and ticking up, to be depressed. But Mats put this in a very, very great way. And that was, hey, those numbers is really easy to get rid of. And if we do that, we have all those pledges, we have all those pressure, we have the solutions, and it will be so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting rid of those could be the big tipping point.
And lastly, maybe the best comment here today was from our great audience that say this: people power will always win.
Exactly.
And
great.
That's going to happen.
Thank you very much indeed for watching We Don't Have Time live from the COP26. And before we go, I think we have some music, some video from Nigeria. Maybe it's a film.
The waka is takelau, and on this waka are our tupuna or ancestors, our grandparents, our mothers, our fathers, our children, our future generations. They are all on the waka, and they all have a role to play. They have a contribution. Their view is valued, and they are part of the solution.
Okay, and now we're going to sign off for tonight's show with an amazing, amazing film. And it's a short film from the Climate Crisis Film Festival. Enjoy the film. Stay tuned to our daily broadcasts. Tomorrow's theme is innovation and digitalization. And we're going to go out with Vaka, a 23-minute film.
are our tupuna or ancestors, our grandparents, our mothers, our fathers, our children, our future generations. They are all on the waka, and they all have a role to play. They have a contribution. Their view is valued, and they are part of the solution. Tokelau is our ancestral home. We are a territory of New Zealand in the South Pacific. Our nearest neighbours are Samoa, 500 kilometres to the south, and Tuvalu, more than 1,000 kilometres to the west. We are a Pacific community leading by example to save our home for current and future generations. Supported by science, our neighbours, and New Zealand, we live and work together by our traditions. We strive to keep Tokelau alive, thriving, and healthy, now and long into the future.
Katau he ane, katau ngā lulue, ki nā mea o mai whai. Te o langa whia nā takitakinga na whai mai ai ki mātou, nā ola mai ai ki mātou, ma takitaki mai ai no ki mātou. Ko nā nganuku, te nganuku la mai e nā ola mai ai, Tokelau, ne? Pa te aloha, he aloha ne, hai mea hakatahi.
E ui lawa ko he tamahe nua, kai kua ki te aloha o te aliki, whakaali mai ki te ki mātou nā tauhinga nā ngāwi o i ngai tuhi ai ko tūlanga i ai ki mātou. E hako ai nā mātua i ai nei. Ko te mātou nuku tēnei, kua kehe te tūlanga kua i ai te tau, kua i ai ki mātou nei.
So you can see that around it we live climate change. We are known as a New Zealand territory, but like Tonga, like Tuvalu, like Samoa, we have challenges that are different from New Zealand. So that's why it's very important for us to have a say, to let the world that we are living with this, the impacts of climate change.
Your Excellencies, recently I visited the remote atolls of Tokelau in the South Pacific. With a population of 1,500 people that is only accessible by boat, they have a story not often heard, but a message that must be shared. It's a message underscored by their new coastal walls, which are already toppling over as a result of the assault by the sea, and by the children who tell you they are worried about the future of their home. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a message of urgency.
And I'm asking myself about the issue of climate change. But at the moment, we can see a very big difference from the past up to now. Very, very hard for me to say, how can I leave this island? It's a special one.
Despite its small footprint, Tokelau is at the front line of climate change.
And in particular in places like Tokelau, their emissions are tiny, but the impacts that they will see of the global emissions will be huge. So since the Industrial Revolution, we've actually almost almost doubled, not quite doubled yet, the carbon dioxide concentration in our atmosphere, and that's having a significant impact on our climate. As a global community, it's obvious that we need to make big effort to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases.
So in 2017, Tokelau endorsed its climate change strategy called Living with Change.
To move these strategies forward, data is essential. This includes the creation of an inventory of Tokelau's greenhouse gas emissions. Through its mitigation strategy, Tokelau aims to further reduce its already low carbon emissions.
Tokelau is really leading in terms of trying to establish a realistic greenhouse gas inventory. So after doing all the consultation with the villagers, going about identifying all the data that we required, we then put it into the testing out using the guidelines from the IPCC to come up with Tokelau's greenhouse gas inventory. And of course, what we found is the energy sector, basically power, electricity generation, is by far the most critical one for Tokelau.
Tokelau switched to solar power in 2012 and made the headline for its renewable energy. Tokelau does not sit back and wait for things to happen.
The off-grid solar system there is perfectly suited for a small island like this. It's been a bit of a launching model for the rest of the Pacific Islands. Hence they're putting them in everywhere, all over the Pacific now.
Renowned for our success with solar energy, Tokelau is now transitioning to a hybrid system that combines both solar and wind generation.
It's just a backup system. It's on a sunny day, you don't need it. But we do, believe it or not, we do get windy days, and they do go on and on. I've forgotten the term. I'll think of it shortly. Islands in the wind, yeah. They don't call it islands in the wind for nothing, yeah.
Kai I te tau hanga, a iwa he lau he hulu hoa, whanau mo ki lalo nā whale. I nai whale lawa nai to toe pe toe whai a whale. Ia, ko nā ngalu hoki, nā o lele mai ki runga te whenua, katoa, mata pe a I te rahi ngana. Nā tahi mea ta aua I lunga ki nei. Ko te taimi te nāna, ko te ka te awa, kai tū maolo te maa lohi te matangi, he ngata ko te matangi, ia kai wena au te moka o ua. Ia, mea hoki aki tātou ki te ai tamā wenua tai ngole te.
As the climate crisis intensifies, so too does the likelihood of catastrophic weather events in the Pacific. To protect our people, Tokelau depends on reliable weather information. Tokelau aims to reduce and manage its climate risks while increasing resilience to natural disasters.
AWS stands for Automatic Weather Station. The beauty of the automatic weather station is you don't have to have a 24/7 shift work to be able to monitor the climate and the weather. Again, it's come down to data.
Tropical data is critical to early warnings of any storm that will strike Tokelau. It's critical in terms of to enable people to prepare for the storm, because we have no mountains to run to in terms of a tidal wave or a storm surge. We are very conscious of this issue because it's affecting our lives and our future generations. When I grew up, there were small islands existed, but now you see nothing there.
Kona o te tai e whanu ki roto. Te tai halo whanu ki roto na tai ngalu ni. E tā ua lele la nā waenga i e nei ni te huinga te tau. Kai ke ilo meho ki tangata i e i e whakaloha toke lauka i e pākina tai mea nā tai ngalu o.
Ia ko te tali ngalu kua nā he tali ngalu lawa ke pui pui e te whenua, ni? Ia ko te mahuanga tali ngalu na hai ke pui pui e nā tai e ngalu. Wa e lo mo ki tātou ko te tai e hiki hiki lawa te tai, ni ki te tau kua e hui mai te. Nā mga mo ko ngalawa ke te lahi te hia mauni heo heo ani tino aloha mai ki tātou te mahenua.
Change compels people to move in ways that previous generations might never have imagined. In Tokelau, this means preparing ourselves to face an uncertain future while maintaining a connection with our culture and with the traditional customs of our people.
Te ata kua kakao e langa kita ko te whānau. We see the future, we rise for the children. That expresses resilience in terms of collectiveness. Our school here has been particularly strong in what we call context-embedded learning, which is learning that looks at a real-life context. And then the students have the freedom to investigate. What is the issue? How is it affecting us? Who's being affected? What are the impacts? What's the cost? And so forth. So I'll give you a specific example. One key context that the students looked at was how healthy is our reef? They learned that their reef is not healthy.
Because of the carbon cycle, some of that carbon dioxide gets dissolved in our oceans. The result of that absorption is that the ocean is actually becoming more acidic. So this is this process of ocean acidification, and it is quite alarming as well, because even though the changes are relatively minor, the ecosystems in our ocean are very sensitive to the level of acidity in the water.
Corals are very sensitive to warm waters. And one interesting property of corals is that they form a symbiosis with an algae. And together, as a team, what they're able to do is be much more productive. If the water temperature increases too far, it destabilizes the symbiosis between these two partners. And so when the algae is gone, the coral dies. It goes beyond just the physical structure. It's also all the fish that may eat the coral, that live on the coral. as all of the ecosystem services that coral reefs provide are then compromised, because the corals really are the foundation. And it can destabilize the ecosystem if too much coral death occurs. But the long-term goal is to reduce emissions so that corals can recover on their own. We can only benefit from working together and bringing cultural knowledge and scientific knowledge together as one. Like long-term traditional cultural knowledge that can inform us about what the ecosystem was like before we started to affect it.
So one of the solutions that the children posed, because they were learning also from what's available on the internet, was coral planting. The coral is pretty dead from this part to that part. Horizontally and vertically, it's pretty much not a healthy reef. They bring their findings to the highest level of decision-making in the village, which is the taupurenga. And in terms of their traditional knowledge, they know which parts of the reef are thriving.
Hako, ko te lahinga nā I ka ake nei ku tau he maua ne, e mehelo nā I ka heopo. Nā I te atule, e mehelo te atule wa heiga e hepo heo I ki nei ne. Ka I hoki nā I ka hou kukitea, he ni ka nā ki te mua ne.
Decisions on protecting the corals and to ensure we had enough fish for food security, because fish is our main source of food in Tokelau. We heavily rely on fish to survive on this isolated island.
Ko nā tautai hoki Tokelau pupoto lele de moana ne. I lato I loa hoi ngā au, tako hoki hoki moana, hai e au te moana ne. E huhula wala e lato, pe olu ki moana pe he ai. Tokelau ko te lato te mei nai e wai Tokelau ko nā waka pie nei ne.
People must really be informed. They can have their own opinions, but they have to consider what the science is saying. It's not a one person thing. It's a collective responsibility for our children and for the whole world, I think.
We've come to realize, to strengthen our traditional knowledge, we need the science. And that is how we can work with the outside world. We are part of something bigger than Tokelau. Why are we doing it for what is the purpose? Do we hope to leave anything behind? For who? For a continued existence. It's important that we do these things. It's a legacy that was left behind. And it's our role to continue that, to create a safer place for our children and for those that are yet to come.
The waka will get through all the rough seas. Our elders are at the stern. They will keep everything calm. The hatupai will provide and look after our young people. The aomanga, or the able-bodied, our church leaders, our teachers in the classroom. Every member of the community is looked after. The waka will have everyone on board. It is a collective responsibility.
Kena. Kila. Kiluma. Kila. Kiluma. Taunuku. 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 Tokelau. Tokelau. Iowe. Iowe. Ke. Iowe. Si.
Ma que tengalinga. Tengalinga tena. Tengalinga tena. Tena, tena, tena.
Iowe. Iowe. Ke. Iowe. Si. Iowe. Iowe. Ke. Iowe.
Ma que tengalinga. Tengalinga tena. Tengalinga tena. Tena, tena, tena. Ma que tengalinga. Tengalinga tena. Tenuku tengalinga. Hea, hea, hea. Ma que tengalinga. Tengalinga tena. Tengalinga tena. Tena, tena, tena. Ma que tengalinga. Tengalinga tena. Tenuku tengalinga. Hea, hea, hea.
Listen, there's a distant sound, closer, soon it's all around. Hear me, time is running out. Come on, tell them what it's all about. We're running out of time, we're running out of air. We gotta keep it clean, show me that you care. Wherever you are, you got to wake up. United as a nation. Come on. We don't have time. No time. We don't have time. No time to wait, there's a world to say. Right or wrong, how will you behave? Do the right thing, as they used to say. More than ever, that is true today. Be part of the solution, switch it up. For future generations, level up. If our planet